evening. The July 2nd, 2018 meeting of the Arundel County Council is now in session. We invite you to stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. And Mr. Trumbauer will lead the invocation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please bow your heads. Dear God, Anne Arundel County, like so many communities across the country, is no stranger to acts of violence. Each and every murder or violent crime is a strike against us as a society, and every life taken in this way is regrettable. Last week, our community experienced a particularly horrific event, one that shook us to our core. When the Capitol Gazette newsroom was attacked, it was an attack on an institution that was part of the fabric of our community. Those of us here on the dais knew some of the victims personally. So today we mourn their loss, and we pray that you may provide comfort to their families and comfort to the survivors who may have escaped death but will forever be scarred by the violence of that day. But we don't ask you solely for comfort. We ask also that you help temper the hatred that is infecting public discourse. Through debate, though debate and differences of opinion are healthy, we ask that you help us remember that hatred and violence serve no just cause. We ask you to protect the helpless and the defenseless. And finally, we ask that you bless this council and give us the wisdom, compassion, and understanding to represent our communities to the best of our abilities in this trying time. At this moment, I'd like to observe a moment of silence for the 5 victims: Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacin, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen. Madam Secretary, would you please read the ethics statement?
The Ethics Commission has asked that I advise you that under certain circumstances, members of the public may qualify as lobbyists when they testify before the County Council. If so, the law requires that certain information be filed with the Ethics Commission. The Chairman of the Ethics Commission has asked that those present review the Ethics Commission information in the foyer of these chambers. If there are any questions about lobbying requirements, speakers should contact the Ethics Commission in the Heritage Office Complex on Riva Road.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Walker has a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How did you come forward? We, as a council members, give out citations often for businesses that are opening and businesses that are creating jobs. And tonight, we don't usually do this in the council chambers, but as to thank businesses that have been operating here in our community and in our county for a number of years, and thank them for their support of our community, the jobs they've created, and the things that they bring to our county. So with us tonight, we have Jake Linger, who actually, we had some words before the meeting. Jake covered us for the Capital newspaper, which is when I first met him many years ago in my first term on the council. And tonight we have with us, he is representing Chuck E. Cheese, which is a company here in our county that has 2 different locations, and we have a couple of citations I just want to read and present to them on behalf of the council. This one is presented to Wilson Jean. We wish to thank you for your commitment to the Annapolis community, local schools, and nonprofits through corporate fundraising programs, your efforts to provide a safe, fun-filled experience for families for over 14 years, and employment throughout the community is appreciated and noteworthy of praise. And this is going to the general manager at the Annapolis location. So we have that one. Thank you very much. And then we have one to Michael Swoboda, who's a district manager. Wish to thank you for your commitment to Anne Arundel County communities, local schools, and nonprofits through corporate fundraising programs for over 22 years. We appreciate your service to the business community and to the citizens of Anne Arundel County. Give that to Jake on his behalf. And then Marie, we wish to thank you for your commitment to the Glen Burnie community, local schools, and nonprofits through corporate fundraising programs, your efforts to provide a safe, fun-filled experience for families for over 17 years. Working your way up from cast member to general manager is noteworthy of praise. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Give Mr. Walker a moment to get back. May I have a motion to suspend the rules to introduce, hear, and vote on Resolution 2518?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on that motion.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to suspend the rules to introduce, hear, and vote on Resolution Number 2518 is adopted.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of the resolution to be introduced this evening.
Resolution Number 2518, resolution dedicating the July 2nd, 2018 legislative session of the Anne Arundel County Council to the memory of Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacin, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I would like to thank Mr. Trumbauer for authoring the resolution that we're going to discuss right now. And as this resolution is on the agenda, our rules preclude speaking about it again at the invitation for audience. But we will momentarily have a full public hearing on the resolution, so I'll be inviting all who wish to share their thoughts and feelings to come forward and speak. So, Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is obviously an emotional issue for many of us, and I think what I would like to...
Mr. Trumbauer,
Yes.
please accept my apology.
Oh, not at all.
I neglected to ask the Madam Secretary to read the title of the resolution
I think she-
again for the public. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 2518.
Resolution Number 2518, resolution dedicating the July 2nd, 2018 legislative session of the Anne Arundel County Council to the memory of Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacin, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters.
Thank you. Please excuse me, Mr. Trumbauer. Go ahead.
Not at all. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is an emotional issue for myself, and I'm sure for other members of the council. And over the weekend, I struggled with what would be an appropriate way to recognize this event and to honor the victims. And so what I came up with, and I thank the entire council for co-sponsoring this, is simply to dedicate this legislative session, which is an unusual thing for this council to do, but to dedicate it to the memory of the victims. And just what I'd like to do is just read verbatim the words of the resolution, and that will consist of my testimony on this. So if I may, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Whereas the Capital Gazette is based in Annapolis, Maryland, and is the newspaper of record for Anne Arundel County, and whereas reporters and editors for the Capital diligently cover the County Council and the business that comes before the Council, and whereas on June 28th, 2018, in a senseless act of violence, employees of the Capitol were targeted in a premeditated attack. And whereas 5 people were murdered in this attack, Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacin, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters. And whereas survivors of the attack will live with the traumatic experience for the rest of their lives. And whereas members of the County Council knew some of these victims personally. And whereas, despite this heinous attack, the staff of the Capitol was able to publish the paper on time the next day, reporting on the attack itself. And whereas members of the media should be free to objectively report on news without the fear of violent retribution, now therefore be it resolved by the County Council of Anne Arundel County, Maryland, that the County Council hereby wishes to extend its sincere condolences to the victims and survivors of the attack, and be it further resolved that the County Council shall dedicate its July 2nd, 2018 legislative session to the memory of Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacin, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters, so that their names will be forever memorialized into the public record of the County Council. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trumbauer. I would like to now open the public hearing on Resolution 2518. Remarks, as always, are limited to 2 minutes, and we can accommodate 6 people up here at the table at one time at the table. And at this time, I would ask if there is anyone who wishes to speak on Resolution number 2518, please come to the table, and when called on, please state your name and address for the record. Good evening, Ms. Johnson.
Good evening. It's hard
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. I think as we look at the horror with the, terrorizing our country, it's tearing us apart, the violence that we're seeing, one profound piece of this is so many people are isolated. There's literally an epidemic of loneliness that they talk about as a medical and health problem. And the people that we have lost were the people who connected everybody. And I have a friend, I was saying, I think that we ought to all go out and subscribe to a year's worth of online, have a year's subscription to online for of the Capitol. And he said, nobody's going to do that. Anybody who wants to watch, what wants to know about the county council can watch it, or they can go to the state legislature. And I said, very few people have time, and very few people are inclined to do so. As a community, we need people who have this depth of memory, this institutional memory, so that they can present the information, whether it's about the teenagers in Broadneck, or the home of the week, or any of the other things that extend from Glen Burnie to the southern part of the county, and east and west from Broadneck to Crofton. We really depend upon this institution. And as Mr. Trumbauer mentioned, in this resolution, he mentioned the fact that the survivors are going to need our support. And it would be unconscionable for us to stand by and fail to reach out to support those people in a concrete and tangible way. And what I think they want most is a job to be able to continue their profession.
Thank you. Thank you. For the record, that's Julie Johnson, Post Office Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Madam Secretary, we now will close the public hearing. I'm seeing no more motion from the audience. Now close the public hearing. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 2518.
Resolution number 2518, resolution dedicating the July 2nd, 2018 legislative session of the Anne Arundel County Council to the memory of Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyacin, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Fink. Aye. Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution number 2518 is adopted.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. We will now invite members of the audience who signed up before the meeting to address the council briefly on any subject not included on the printed agenda. Again, remarks will be limited to 2 minutes. I see one person signed up. Dave Kurtik.
Yes, sir.
Please come forward and take a seat, sir. Wherever you sit, they'll turn on the microphone. So there you go.
My name's Dave Kurtik. This is the first time I've been to one of these meetings here. I'm a homeowner at Tanyard Springs community in Glen Burnie. We have HOA fees that we pay every month. All the homeowners there do. And according to what the HOA tells us, the streets in our community are private streets. Our homeowners' dues pay every month to take care of those streets. Something that myself and several other homeowners live there are concerned about is we have these, and again, these are supposed to be private streets. We have these peddlers, hucksters, trespassers going up and down the street, knocking on doors, ringing doorbells, Comcast, Verizon, people passing out Chinese food menus, pizza menus, ringing doorbells again, these irritating ice cream trucks. I had somebody come into my backyard trying to sell me a security system. Now, I've spoken about this. The HOA has said that we cannot stop them, even though these are private streets. I've spoken to the Anne Arundel County Police because we have police officers who live there. Police officer told me that, again, we can't stop them, and that the sign at the entrance to the community that says private property, no trespassing, no solicitation, the police officer told me that sign is meaningless. These people, these peddlers, salespeople, distributors, restaurants, power washing people, they're conducting business on the street. And I believe, and some of my other neighbors believe, this shouldn't be done on a private street. Anybody can come on to the private property and run a business that our dues are paying for. And I'm also concerned, as are some of my fellow homeowners, that these can be, as in other places such as Baltimore County, people are disguising themselves as peddlers and they're really casing the joint, trying doorknobs, seeing what windows are open. That's what I'm concerned about. And several of my fellow homeowners and I feel, for many issues, forgotten in Tenured Springs, being so far away from Annapolis. I did write a letter to Mr. Fink's office about this months ago, didn't get a response. So that's why I came to speak here tonight.
Thank you for your testimony tonight, sir. Appreciate it very much. Ms. Johnson? Mr. Fink.
If you get a chance to look at tonight's agenda, we're addressing public roads on legislation. That'll be heard the first meeting in September.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fink. Ms. Johnson?
Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I'm torn between giving you more of a sales pitch about how important it is for the members of the community to really support this institution, the freedom of the press, the right to petition government. We really need our press, and we simply must rally around these folks and help them survive and thrive.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, the subject matter...
Well, that's what, I'm not allowed to do that because that was the resolution?
You're making me pull out the rules here, yeah.
Okay, well, I was going to say that during talk about that during the invitation to the audience. So I'll go back to Judge Aaron. Because you know that I'm concerned about violence in the community. And Judge Aaron was a black man who was assaulted, abducted, castrated, left for dead, and he survived. And he suffered for the rest of his life. He suffered a great deal of pain. For a period of time, he had some care. But because of the hatred, and because of the violence of the Klan, and the fact that the Klan members were protected by the government, high-ranking public officials, from the governor, the head of the state troopers, Colonel Al Lingo, all of these people not only left the black community terrified of the Klan, but the white community was afraid to stand up. Here was a man who was, for all intents and purposes, maimed and crippled. He could not perform heavy labor. And people who were good and decent, who would normally stand up and say, hey, we're going to take care of you. We're going to create a fund. We're going to make sure you have food and shelter and the medications that you need. Everyone was too afraid, and everyone was silent, and he spent the rest of his life suffering.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We'll now close the invitation to audience. Is there any item any council member would like to place on the agenda? I will announce that I'm withdrawing Bill number 5718. May I have a motion that the partial reading of any bill, resolution, or minutes constitutes a reading of the whole?
So moved, Mr. Chair. Second.
Madam Secretary, please read the minutes of June 14th and 18th, 2018.
Minutes of June 14, 2018. The meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 9:11 a.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Peruka, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Move to accept the minutes as read.
I have one more to read.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Minutes of June 18, 2018. The meeting was called to order by Chairman Michael Peruka at 7 p.m. and opened with the invocation given by Mr. Trumbauer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Trumbauer.
Oh, sorry. I'll move to accept the minutes as read.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
The motion carries. The minutes of June 14th and June 18th, 2018 stand approved as read. Madam Secretary, please read the titles of the bills to be introduced this evening.
Do you have an agenda? Do you have an agenda? Bill number 6818, an ordinance concerning branches of county government, judicial branch, orphans court, judge's salary. Bill number 6918, an ordinance concerning public safety massage establishments. Bill number 7018, an ordinance concerning animal control and zoning, miniature pigs in residential districts. Bill number 7118, an ordinance concerning licenses, towing companies, non-consensual towing, private roads.
That's yours, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the titles of the resolutions to be introduced this evening.
Resolution number 2218, resolution approving submission of names for the Property Tax Assessment Appeal Board. Resolution number 2318, resolution approving estimates of the annual costs of providing health insurance benefits and the employer subsidies used to determine the rates for certain participants under the County Employee and Retiree Health Benefits Program. Resolution number 2418, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to require that the county auditor receive a copy of any report related to employee theft or fraud in the county government, and to permit the county auditor to inspect the records relating to the report and forward any exception to the findings of the fraud investigation to the county council and the county executive. Resolution number 2518, resolution dedicating, we already did that, my apologies. Resolution number 2618, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to amend the Anne Arundel County Charter to add additional duties to the provisions related to the county auditor to provide for financial and performance audits of any office, department, or agency funded in whole or in part by county funds, and to permit the county auditor to review all records maintained by all officers, agents, and employees of the county and all offices, departments, institutions, boards, commissions, courts, corporations, and other agencies to the extent necessary for the conduct of their duties, and to provide authority to conduct a separate investigation on any act or allegation of fraud, waste, or abuse in the obligation, expenditure, receipt, or use of county resources.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. May I have a motion to suspend the rules to hear and vote on bills number 6218 and 6318 out of order?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to suspend the rules to take bills number 6218 and 6318 out of order is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of bill number 6218.
And I gotta get there. Bill number 6218, an ordinance concerning the issuance, sale, and delivery of Anne Arundel County, Maryland general obligation bonds and bond anticipation notes.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's office. With me at the table, Karen McQuaid and Laureen Toney from the Office of Finance, as well as Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law, and outside counsel Bill Henn. We thank you for taking this bill out of order tonight. Bill 6218 is the annual bond ordinance concerning the issuance, sale, and delivery of the county's general obligation bonds and bond anticipation notes. Bond anticipation notes are issued in the form of a line of credit, which are short-term loans. The purpose of this ordinance is to authorize the issuance of bond anticipation notes not to exceed $400 million and bonds not to exceed $1,089,987,775 to finance the county's fiscal year 19 county council approved budget. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council have. We've been trading information back and forth with the auditor's office, and we have an amendment to offer at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick. Any discussion, any questions, Madam Auditor?
No, I don't have any questions at this time. The amendments that they're presenting will update the information in the bill to match our final passed capital budget from a couple weeks ago. So I will comment on the amended bill in my next letter.
Thank you. We will now then open the public hearing. Our remarks will be limited to 2 minutes. Is there a sign-up sheet for this, Madam Secretary? No sign-up. If anyone wishes to testify on this matter, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on 6218. Madam Secretary, please read the title of bill number 6218.
Bill number 6218, an ordinance concerning the issuance, sale, and delivery of Anne Arundel County, Maryland general obligation bonds and bond anticipation notes.
Okay, there's an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1, This amendment increases the amount of bond authority and corrects amounts in the bill to conform to the final capital budget.
Thank you. Motion to adopt?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Madam, Mr. Barzyk?
Nothing to add other than what the auditor and Ms. Gray said. This makes this, the numbers correct based on the fiscal year 19 budget.
Anything further, Madam Auditor? No. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you. Bill number 6218, as amended, will be heard on July 16, 2018. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 6318.
Bill number 6318, an ordinance concerning animal control, dog and cat licenses, dangerous animals.
Thank you. Mr. Grasso.
In my continuous efforts of trying to fix the dangerous ordinance or bill that we've passed as the entire council, I've dealt with several people, and I just kind of felt that $250 registration every year is a little unpalatable as far as I'm concerned. So I'm proposing that the council takes it to half of that. I think $125 is more than enough to ask the people for once a year to register the dangerous animal. In the last couple of cases that I physically got into, the title dangerous by no means really meets the animals once you met them. But however, due to the law that this council has passed, that's the title that they're currently handling. I'm currently working with the animal control, not animal control, but the animal advocate group to fix the problems that we have with our dangerous animal law, to make it a little bit more choiceful and I guess in the terms that we use, and that's where we're at.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Mr. Marsick?
Mr. Chairman, we support the bill.
Thank you. Any other questions
Mr.
for
Chair?
Mr. Trumbauer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Presumably, the fee, I mean, what is the purpose of the fee to begin with? Is it to pay for the administration of a program, or is it meant to be a deterrent to have a dangerous animal?
I'll defer to Robin Catlett and Captain Hassenbush from the police department.
Sure.
So the fee was there well before I started, but there are administrative things that we have to do to ensure that owners stay in compliance with dangerous orders, including inspections, reviewing everything, making sure that we keep the dangerous animal registry up to date, those type of things that we have to do on a regular basis.
Okay. And so, I mean, is it logical to assume that if we lower the fee, it may entice more people to register an animal, or do they only have to register it if they're compelled to because there was an incident?
They're compelled to.
Yeah, they would have to do it in accordance with their order of having a dangerous animal. They have to keep their animal licensed on an annual basis.
And so they pay the fee annually?
Correct.
Okay. And the small fiscal note, $9,600 will not impact your ability to administrate the program?
The funds that we take in as an agency go into the general fund. They don't
Okay.
just fund us.
Understood.
So I don't anticipate the administration plans on changing that based on the bills.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. Anything else? Then we will now open the public hearing on Bill 6318.
No sign up.
There's no sign up. Thank you. If anyone would like to testify on this matter, please come down at this time. 2, 3, 4. Seeing no movement, we will now close the public hearing on Bill number 6318. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 6318.
Bill number 6318, an ordinance concerning animal control, dog and cat licenses, dangerous animals.
Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 6318.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 6318 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you all. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5118 as amended.
Bill number 5118 is amended, an ordinance concerning disposition of real property transferred to governmental entities.
Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chair, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. This is a bill we discussed at length at the last council meeting, and we have an amendment at the appropriate time. With me at the table, Samantha Harris and Christine Romans from Central Services, as well as Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council has.
Thank you. Are there any questions? In that case, we will open the public hearing on Bill number 5118. Is there a sign-up sheet on this? No?
No.
If anyone would like to testify on this matter on Bill number 5118, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, the public hearing on Bill number 5118 as amended is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5118 as amended.
Bill number 5118 is amended, an ordinance concerning disposition of real property transferred to governmental entities.
Thank you. And there are amendments. Madam Secretary, please read the amendment number 7.
Amendment number 7. This amendment adds a definition of quasi-governmental entity and adds quasi-governmental entity as an allowable requester of a transfer of surplus real property.
Move to adopt.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Any other discussion? Madam Secretary, oh, I'm sorry. Is there any discussion on the amendment? But Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, you'll remember, and council remember from the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion regarding what is a quasi-government entity. This now adds the definition of what quasi-government entity is, as well as adds the ability to transfer a property back to a quasi-government entity back into the bill. So we ask for your support tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick. Any questions or any amendment number 7? Where are we? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 7.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Pruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 7 is adopted.
Thank you. That means that Bill number 5118 as amended will be heard on July
We have another
16th.
amendment, sir.
We have other amendments for this bill.
Yes, we do.
Not so fast. Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 8.
Amendment number 8. This amendment requires notice by publication in a local newspaper of the request to transfer of county real property to another governmental entity.
Thank you. Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Marzick.
This is Mr. Pruski.
Oh, Mr. Pruski, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the things that we discovered is that when this council passes a resolution, they could do it within that meeting and there could be no public notice. I thought that for transparency in this bill that there should be some publication in a local newspaper if there's a request to transfer real property, and that's why I'm adding this amendment or suggesting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski. Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, members of council, I guess I think you're incorrect in your basis that they can offer the resolution. They'd have to suspend the rules in order to do that the night of. You couldn't do that for one of these resolutions because it's transferring a property, only for congratulatory other type resolutions where they can be introduced and voted on the same night. So council would have to vote to change those rules. But I guess I really had a question about the advertisement. Is the advertising being done by the council because it's not actually introduced, or would it have to be done by the administration because you're asking for it to be done before the resolution is introduced? Or would you want to require the council to advertise it after it's been introduced? I'm not sure what you're looking for.
I just want to introduce, to be honest with you, to make sure that, you know, that there's a public opportunity to understand what's being surplused or exchanged.
Okay. I'm not sure this is necessary, Mr. Chairman. I guess just to conclude my thought, I think, I guess I understand the goal, but I guess we can live with it if we have to do it. We presumably would be advertising in the paper, we being Central Services. And I guess we would figure out a way to do it unless the council takes on that duty.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink.
I think it makes sense, you know, for the advertising, but would it be that, I mean, Mr. Persky, it seems like every other bill that we amend, that administration introduces it, maybe the council accepts it. If the council accepts it, then we have to wait 2 weeks to vote on it? Or do you want, or is the purpose of it, and I think this is what Mr. Marzick was asking, but does he have to advertise it before they introduce it to find out if it even passes the council?
I mean, the reality is, I'm certainly open to, making this amendment correct, but I do believe that we need to make sure that any transfer is publicized. I'm not sure what else to add. I mean, Ms. Tate, if you want to chime in as well.
You could do it two different ways, I guess. The request you asked for reflects your concern that the resolution could be introduced and voted the same night, and therefore it would be amended before. The alternative is to require resolutions introduced under this section to be advertised before they can be voted on by the council. Either way, I don't know whether it's a substantial situation for central services to advertise it or not. We don't advertise resolutions before they're voted on, except for certain ones that require advertising under the code. So I guess I'll defer to you as the sponsor as to whether you want a different amendment, but this one contemplates that the administration would do the advertising before it comes in.
Which I'm fine with.
All right. Any other discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 8.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 8 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 9.
Amendment number 9. This amendment excludes the Maryland Stadium Authority as an allowable requester of a transfer of surplus property under Section 183209.
Motion to adopt?
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski.
Yes, I just believe we identified quasi-governmental, but I don't think this council should be in the business of dealing with the Maryland Stadium Authority in terms of the way this bill was written. We were brought forward the idea that this was for stormwater management, small projects, and there's many concerns in the community related to this agency and things that are trying to be built. So I'm just asking that the council consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick.
I don't see a problem with it that I know of. I don't think we'd be transferring properties to Stadium Authority, so.
Any other discussion, Mr. Pruski? Anything? All right, thank you. Where are we? Madam Secretary, then please call the roll on amendment number 9.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 9 is adopted.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you. Thank you. Then Bill number 5118 as amended will be heard on July 16, 2018. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 5618 as amended.
Bill number 5618 is amended, an ordinance concerning personnel classified service exempt service.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Andy Rhodes from Personnel, as well as Kelly Love from the Office of Law. This is the bill that incorporates all the negotiated agreements with the bargaining units for fiscal year 19. We ask you to pass this bill tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick. Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, if Madam Auditor could weigh in, because I know we amended this last time, but I just want to make sure everything's in order to the best of your review.
Yes, so we checked all the changes per the amendments, and we agree with those. So-
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. Appreciate it. In that case, we will open the public hearing on Bill number 5618. Is there a sign up? No. Anyone who would like to testify on Bill 5618, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, The public hearing on Bill 5618 as amended is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 5618 as amended.
Bill number 5618 is amended, an ordinance concerning personnel classified service exempt service.
Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill 5618 as amended.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 5618 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill number 5818.
Bill number 5818, an ordinance concerning planning and development master plan for land preservation, parks, and recreation.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Marsick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzik in the County Executive's office. With me at the table, Ken Albin, Dave Smalley from Rec and Parks is in the crowd, Barbara Polito. We also have Ben Sussman, who's a consultant with ERM, who was involved in the drafting of the master plan, as well as Mr. Hager is in the audience, and Christine Niter from the Office of Law is at the table. Bill 5818 approves the 2017 master plan for land preservation, parks, and recreation. Plan has to be updated every 5 years. The last plan was adopted by council in 2013. This plan before you presents an inventory of recreation and resource land and facilities, identifies county recreation, park, and open space needs to serve as a guide for parkland acquisition and development, and it also sets the policies and actions to address the needs of the county for the next 15 years. We'd be happy to answer any questions, and we will be offering an amendment at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick. Mr. Pruski.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I had a question in regards to committees. Now, I know this is a master plan, but there are several projects that have proposed committees involved, and I didn't see that anywhere in the plan, and I'm not sure where that's addressed. So let me give you an example. There's a Tenants Alliance committee that's supposed to be formed. We had the Hammonds Committee for the dairy farm. There's the Friends of Kinder Park. How come that's not included in the plan? Because certainly these projects are being introduced, and we don't see, I mean, you had the input of people who want stuff, but when the people who live next door don't know what's going on. So I'm just curious if you could address that.
Typically, all of those are handled through the master plan process for whatever specific park you're working on. The Tennis Center Committee came together fairly recently. We finished up our process in February on this plan. So as far as the Tennis Center Committee goes, that's not addressed. But again, most of those committees are master plan issues. This is an overall guide for a long-range 15-year plan for the department. So we really don't get into each individual committee. We have a lot of committees supporting everything that we're doing. We did consult with the Water Access Commission, and we consulted with the Bike Commission, and we consulted with local athletic groups. We have an ongoing relationship with environmental groups, as you know, River Keepers, South River Federation, et cetera. So that's the extent of what we did with commissions. I will say we're very proud of our public outreach. We advertised in the papers for 2 consecutive weeks in the Capitol. We did not bury it in the public notice section. We bought space in the paper. We were usually on pages 3 and 4 of the Capitol Gazette, and we advertised our survey. We got 2,400 responses on the survey that we put out. So we think we're moving into the latest technology in gathering public input, and we feel we're doing better with these public outreach surveys online than we are in having a host of public meetings where we have 20 to 50 attendees, and usually they're just special interest concerns of folks. So we're proud of our outreach.
Okay. One follow-up specific project to the dairy farm. I wasn't on this council when the lease was passed, but I want to, as you could probably tell, it's a hot topic with me. There were some errors that I saw in the plan regarding the acreage, which, you know, I know we have an amendment tonight. If that passes, I can go over with you. But, and I did talk to Mr. Marzick about this today in regards to the purchasing versus the leasing. You know, this plan, my understanding is that purchasing, but if that doesn't go through, we would lease. So how does that work if we have an inconsistent plan, you know, in terms of the words we use? Because if we're submitting this to the state, does this say the state, this is our priority, the council approves? I mean, I just want to know what does this do, or what does this tell? What's the consequences of us approving or not approving this?
Well, Well, I guess I would need to know the specific errors you're referring to, but basically the dairy farm has been a lease up to this point. Recently, the federal government has shown an interest in selling a portion of the dairy farm to us, and the federal government is working on that. But we really can't have any movement on that until we hear back from the federal government. And the dairy farm per se, any acquisition that we do, we have a greenways, parkland, and open space acquisition account that allows us to move forward on any opportunity purchases. We certainly try to identify all the needs for acreage, but we don't get down into specifics on each individual parcel that we're going to acquire.
Okay, thank you.
And for the record, that was Mr. Ken Albin of the Department of Recreation and Parks. And I've said that because I'm neglecting to ask you all, the first time you speak, to please identify yourself. It makes the record a whole lot easier to record, okay? So
My apologies. Ken Albin, Capital Projects Administrator, Recreation and Parks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr.
Okay,
Grasso.
so we're dealing with the dairy farm now is basically what we're talking about, right? So my thoughts are, because you know I'm a tree hugger, I'll tell everybody that. And one of the things that concern me is, like I spoke to Mr. Marsick about this. The issue is that I don't think anybody has a problem with a couple fields, right? And what do we define as a couple fields? 2 or 3? And the issue is that I think we talked earlier that the Navy, through our lease, we could go through the Navy, but we can't go through the federal government. Is that what it is? Because they won't allow it? Explain to me what you explained to me earlier so I can get a better grab on it.
So just to back up a little bit, how long have you been leasing the property?
Oh, gosh, I've been here 10 years, I would say.
So we've been leasing the property from the U.S. Navy for over 10 years. The attorneys for the U.S. Department of the Navy have said repeatedly that federal law prohibits the county from building ball fields on the dairy farm property. We disagree with that. We've tried through our congressional representatives to change that. There has not been an appetite from the Navy to change that federal law, which says that the dairy farm shall remain rural. They don't believe that ball fields are rural. The latest effort that we've been working with Congressman Brown's office on is to purchase 40 acres of the 856 acres. We have shared that plan with the council. When we had the budget discussions, we sent down the map and the overall plan for what would be done on those 40 acres. The plan, as I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, maybe Mr. Albin can back me up, is for several ball fields, as well as trails and other passive type recreation, whether it's gardens or other rec and park amenities that have been in the works for years waiting to move forward. But our hands have been tied by the U.S. Navy on this regard. And the U.S. Navy is now saying they are willing to sell us these 40 acres of the property. And currently the U.S. House of Representatives has passed the Defense Authorization Act that would allow that transfer to occur. The Senate version of the bill did not include that language in there. There's currently an ongoing conference committee that is taking place. I just was speaking with Congressman Brown's office today on this. Congressman Rob Whitman, who is from Virginia, actually serves on the Naval Academy Board of Visitors, is supportive of the language. He co-sponsored the 40-acre language. He is on the conference committee, and we're working through his office to get that language included in the conference report.
Okay. Now, I'm guessing the picture that I got here, have you seen a dairy farm proposed athletic field? Have you seen this one here?
That's the one we provide. That's what I was just referring to.
Okay. So my thing of it is that sometimes people move where they want to move because they like what they see. And to me, this looks like, just in all intents and purposes, based on this, it looks like a lot more than just a couple fields. And the question is, all these people that have their investments around here, do they want a sport field in their neighborhood? That's the only question I'm asking. And I'm guessing that this field, or it is a field, it's not a bunch of trees, right? It's a farm. Cropland, it's already been cut down, or no?
I don't know off the top of my head off those 40 acres. I'm not sure.
What do you think? Is it a bunch of trees they're going to mow down?
It's agricultural farmland.
So it's all farming?
Yes, we're not taking trees down in that area.
So my thing is like with Councilman Pruski, I'm sure he's got a pretty good feed on what his people think. But I can tell you what, if I lived over here looking at these houses and they put this there would be war for me.
Right.
I'm just telling you, it just doesn't, I don't know, man. People move in the areas where they want to move in, and I always said if I wanted to live in Baltimore City, I would live in Baltimore City, right? But it chose to me over in Anne Arundel County to have somewhat of a little bit different style of living, but I don't know. And so the county executive said that he was only talking a couple ball fields, if I remember correctly today. And what was the other thing he said? A trail?
Trails and other passive recreation.
Okay. So now, in either case, I remember we talked earlier or last council meetings that we were talking about the one bill that Councilman Smith talked about several times about the property up in North County. So if you guys were to get to a negotiated situation, before you sign the ink dotted line, you would have to come before the council to get
Correct.
final approval.
Under the legislation that we introduced and council unanimously passed, any purchases with the Advanced Land Fund would have to come back to the council for approval. I also add to it that every year we go through the budget process, and any changes that are being made to this property would have to be approved by the council through the budget process.
Okay.
So any improvements to that would be improved through the Recreation and Parks capital budget.
Yeah, I guess, and Councilman Brewski is always involved in, I guess, the communities, but my thing would be is, I'm sure he has already done this, but I'd be banging the daylights out of these doors to ask these people they for, because it looks like a sports complex. And it might sound great, but there's a lot of people that, this is their large investment of their homes, and they're living in this rural area, and I don't know if they take it kindly to make it look like a sport complex, and that's my only concern.
Absolutely, and the public will be involved every step of the way. And just respectfully, that's a separate issue from what's in front of us now. This is the planning document for Rec and Parks. That's a specific project that we debated during the budget, and we'll debate again next year during the budget as well. Okay. But I think you also need to, as I'm sure you understand, there is an overwhelming need for recreation facilities throughout the county, especially in this area of the dairy farm. And we obviously will have tremendous public input into this once we have the ability to actually build ball fields. We still don't have that ability right now.
Yeah, well, I kind of think of this stuff because when I had that controversial vote with the Randazzo field, and I tell you what, the community over there is definitely not for upspilling that ball field. And so I sit back and I think about those folks and how they got all bent out of shape. Question is, will these people get all bent out of shape with the same thought?
Right.
They might very well say, the people that have kids and say, yeah, we need ball fields, but they're not the ones living there. And that's my biggest concern. But like you said, it's another debate to come. Thank you, Mr. Brewski.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso. Mr. Brewski.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Grasso brought up a good point. I don't think anybody's denying the fact that we need more ball fields. It's the process we go about doing it and putting the cart before the horse. We had a Hammond's Connection Committee that served the dairy farm that no longer exists. So the point is, yes, we're making a plan, but I think you actually plan with the community and then put the plan forward. That's the issue that I'm trying to bring up here. Same with the tennis facility is that things change. So I think that why I was asking you that question, Ken, is that why can't we get these committees together before we're approving plans? Because we're sending a message to the state that we are 100% behind this, then we spend money on it, and then all of a sudden we go to the community and they only want 4 ball fields or they want it a certain way. So I think the input process is what's critical and important, and that's what I was trying to stress about what's there. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, we will now open the public hearing on bill number 5818, and we have one gentleman signed up, Mr. Kevin McLean. Would you come down, sir?
Where do you want me? This one? Okay, thank you. I'm Kevin McLean. I live at 96 Kinder Way, Millersville. My property backs up to Kinder Park, and I would encourage everyone to vote against this bill, 5818. And the reason is this. I've only for the last 2 or 3 weeks dug through the dog park section of this 130 pages of legislation. If you take I made a Google map of where the dog parks are right now and where our population lives. So you can't put these dog parks any further away from where people live. Overlay where the dense population is, we don't have any. If you look at it, I've been trying for 6 years, along with a lot of others, to get a dog park at Kinder. We've done everything possible to get that done. It isn't in this plan. It's never going to happen. I don't know why, but it's not. But if you put a dog park at Kinder, We are now North County, believe it or not, because north of us, we're bad. But just think about all the districts above us: Linthicum, Brooklyn Park, even Severn to a certain extent. All these northern county parks, there's nothing for people with dogs. Now remember, we have a leash law, right? Where are these dogs going to run? There's nowhere. We have 5 parks, maybe 10 acres for 544,000 people. 166,000 of them have dogs. And this is just the part I've been looking at. So this 130-page document has that flaw. And even in it, if you read it quite carefully, they say, oh yeah, we need dog parks. And then they put it priority 2. Well, it's like the 3rd or 4th, most requested thing in their own data. And then they go, well, it's a priority 2, and we'll put a couple dollars to it. Now in there, it says Lakeshore is going to rehab their facility, and guess what they're going to do? Put a dog park in at Lakeshore. This month or next month, we're going to spend $500,000 at the big kids park, but there's not going to be any dog park put there. So please vote against it. Look at it. 130 pages. Believe me, there's a lot of things in there that were not coordinated with the community.
Thank you very much for coming down, Mr. McLean. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I missed out on all of this, including, the announcements in the newspaper, which is unusual for me, I think. But I'm really fired up about this in several ways. One is I served with the Naval Academy when they were talking about converting the dairy farm to not a dairy farm. And I think that we need agricultural land within the community. And there is there's a whole huge movement academically that we put way too much emphasis on sports. If we're going to do something there, then we need to do, intellectual education about farming. Did you know that the dairy farm, the Naval Academy Dairy Farm, was the model for the most modern dairy farms in the country, and people flocked to that dairy farm in order to prevent the same kind of epidemics that triggered the formation of the dairy farm. That is, there was an epidemic of typhoid at the academy, and they said, hey, we can't have this. And so just a tremendous amount of research. The other thing that I'm fired up about is with the Crownsville Small Area Planning Committee and with the General Development Plan, we're going to preserve the natural resources. We need, to provide habitat and stuff, for, the birds. We want to preserve, breeding areas and so forth. Well, let me tell you, I've been up to Harold Harbor this season, and that community has absolutely been ravaged. And I don't know all about who done it, but I can tell you that it's a violation of everything everybody told me when I was on that small area, planning committee and went door to door. People are really upset. So
thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you. We will now close the public hearing on Bill 5818. There is an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read the
Title.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill 5818.
Bill number 5818, an ordinance concerning planning and development master plan for land preservation, parks, and recreation.
Okay, there is an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment amends the plan to correct the grand total all projects to approximately $426 million, to correct the average annual cost of the CIP program over 15 years to $28.4 million, and to compare the annual average program cost for the next 15 years to the average capital budget for the Department of Recreation and Parks for fiscal years 2017 and 2018.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Motion to adopt?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
And this is Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, this was just to correct some mistakes that were in the budget numbers included in the plan. This would make them correct.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Do you have anything to
I
add?
haven't looked at this yet. This is the first I've seen it, so I'll be commenting on this in my next letter. It's
Okay.
passed.
Mr. Trumbauer, did you?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Mr. Pruski? No. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you. That means that Bill number 5818, as amended, will be heard on July 16, 2018. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5918.
Bill number 5918, an ordinance concerning personnel exempt service, deputy planning and zoning officer.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Andy Rhodes from Personnel, Phil Hager from Planning and Zoning, and Kelly Lovett from the Office of Law. Bill 5918 creates a classification of a deputy at Planning and Zoning who will be in the exempt service. This position is established at an E5. This position was funded in the council's recently passed budget, where we had a discussion on this and a next bill from Mr. Hager while he was discussing his budget. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council has.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Good evening. If not, then we will open the public hearing on Bill number 5918. Is there any sign up? No. There's no sign up. Would anybody like to testify on Bill number 5918? Please come down at this time.
You're good.
Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing on Bill 5918. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 5918.
Bill number 5918, an ordinance concerning personnel exempt service, deputy planning and zoning officer.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 5918.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith? Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 5918 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Would you please read the title of Bill number 6018?
Bill number 6018, an ordinance concerning personnel exempt service, deputy director, emergency management office.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Andy Rhodes from Personnel, Kevin Aftung from Emergency Management, and Kelly Lovett from the Office of Law. Bill 6018 creates classification of a Deputy Emergency Management Director in the exempt service. This position will be established at the grade E3. We again discussed this during the budget. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council has, as the council did support this position and fund it in the fiscal year 19 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Marzick. Are there any questions? If not, then we will now open the public hearing on Bill number 6018. Somebody sign up for this? No? If there's anybody who wishes to testify on Bill number 6018, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, the hearing on Bill number 6018 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 6018.
Bill number 6018, an ordinance concerning personnel exempt service, deputy director, emergency management office.
Final discussion. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 6018.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Bill number 6018 is passed.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of Bill number 6118.
Bill number 6118, an ordinance concerning personnel positions in the classified service.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bill Bernie Marzick, County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Andy Rose from Personnel, and Kelly Lovett from the Office of Law. Bill 6118 creates new titles, grades, and minimum qualifications for the following positions: solid waste mechanic in Public Works, deputy sheriff corporal, and a GIS manager. These positions, again, were all updated in the recently passed budget. We'd ask for your support of this bill tonight.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? In that case, we will now open the public hearing on Bill number 6018. If there's anyone who would like to testify on this matter, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, the public hearing on Bill number 6118 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 6118.
Bill number 6118, an ordinance concerning personnel positions in the classified service.
Any discussion? I understand there are amendments. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1, this amendment changes the pay grade for the child care program specialist from an NR 13B to an NR 14B.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Barzyk?
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I neglected to say we have 2 amendments for this bill. This bill just changes the grade to make it correct.
Madam Auditor?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask Ms. Fulton about this child care program specialist in the amendment number 1. Is this the same one that we had to change a budget page for at the last minute? They had them originally in the proposed budget book at NR 14, but they had to change the budget book page to say NR 13 because they didn't meet the qualifications for an NR 14. Can you explain the history of this and what we're doing now?
Andrea Rhodes. Thank you. Andrea Rhodes, Personnel Officer. Yes, ma'am. What happened during the budget, Ms. Dickinson, is they placed the child care program specialist and replaced them as program specialist 1s in our 15s. And when we realized that those individuals did not all qualify for that, we talked to the department, and the compromise was to look at adjusting the pay grade. So everyone that's in this classification does meet the minimum qualifications.
Okay, then we moved it from an NR 15 to an NR 14, and this just meets that.
Correct.
That page. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Any further questions? If not, then we will open the...
I'll call the roll.
Oh, excuse me, we will call the roll on amendment number 1. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read amendment number 2.
Amendment number 2, this amendment reclassifies a vacant position in the Department of Public Works from Automotive Mechanic 3 to Solid Waste Mechanic pursuant to Section 61110 of the County Code.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Marzick?
Nothing more to add, Mr. Chairman. This is just to fix an error in the bill.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Nothing? Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 2.
Mr. Fink? Aye. Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 2 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Bill number 6218, as amended, will be heard on July 16th, 2061. 61. Bill number 6118, as amended, will be heard on July 16, 2018. Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 6418.
Bill number 6418, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development, general provisions, adequate public facilities.
Thank you. Mr. Fink?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the council, this should look pretty familiar language. We passed an amendment on one of Mr. Grasso's bills a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago at this point. His bill dealing with the APF, we passed an amendment grandfathering the changes in. When we passed that amendment, there were some issues with the wording with the amendment and didn't apply for the submittal, the application submittal. So this bill just go ahead and adds the intent of that amendment, and it still has a start date of August 1st, which was, I believe, the intent of that amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick?
We're supportive of the bill.
Thank you. Mr. Trumbauer?
Thank you. You anticipated me pressing my button, Mr. Peruka.
How are you going for it?
How prescient of you.
Getting to know you.
So thank you to the sponsor of the bill for explaining the intent. I know, so you made reference to the APF work group, which I sat on. No.
I didn't make reference to the group.
You didn't?
No.
But you made reference to the amendment that the group came up with.
I made a reference to my amendment to Mr. Grasso's bill. I didn't talk about
What did that amendment do?
it. Grandfathered in Mr. Grasso's bill, his changes.
Okay.
So
you're saying there was an error that didn't conform with exactly what you wanted it to do, so this is just a fix of that?
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So we already passed it.
Mr. Fink's
and-
amendment was offered before we came together and we ran out of time.
I see.
And we had that last amendment that we
Okay.
offered as a group, so we couldn't.
So this doesn't change anything with the intent of?
Correct.
the final passage of that bill?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was trying to get at.
Thank you. Mr. Marzi, do you have anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, then we will now open the public hearing on Bill number 6418. Is there a sign up for that? No. Anyone who wishes to speak on Bill number 6418, please come down at this time.
Do we grandfather my bill? Because I don't know.
Ms. Johnson.
Jill Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland. I have been running into some issues with building up in the Crownsville area. And I have found that there are several builders and developers who simply keep coming back to the well every couple of years, or excuse me, and they are building a couple of houses every year, so that over the past 20 years, I've not been able, I haven't had the time, or really it's not fun to try to track down, how many of these houses these different people have built. But it's a significant number of houses, and if it's an average of 2 houses a year over 20 years, that's 40 houses in the community. That's an impact. But you see, because they're building where there was a 1924 plat, well, it seems that they're allowed to build. Now, I know that the law says you're not supposed to be building on steep slopes. There are requirements about the property perking, their minimum sizes. But golly gee, this doesn't seem to be being enforced. And I think that there is and I know there is a lot of concern, there are a lot of objections to what is happening in terms of more intense development, but there's also a question about the schools and the impact. And these folks have been allowed to just avoid, it's not even an issue. 2 houses here or 2 houses there, it's not a big deal. But it is, especially when you add up the number of builders that are involved. The development community has a lot of power in this county, but I have real concerns, and I will tell you the people I have been speaking to in the communities also are really concerned.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
And object.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. The public hearing on Bill number 6418 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 6418.
I'm going to read it in for a vote first.
Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 6418.
Bill number 6418, an ordinance concerning subdivision and development, general provisions, adequate public facilities.
Any final discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I may, sorry.
Go ahead,
Mr. Trumbauer.
Sorry, if I may, one more follow-up question. I'm just trying to get my head around this. So to the sponsor of the bill, the new date, the date in here is August 1st, 2018. That, to the best of my knowledge, is in the future. Was that the original contemplation in your amendment?
Yes.
But that language is not in this bill anywhere. Is it in a different section?
It is in this bill. So if you look at second page, line 42.
Well, that's new language. That's the language you're putting in.
Correct. So the big issue is the submittal. Submitting by August 1st.
All right. So what did your original amendment do? I can't remember the specifics.
Grandfathered in any projects that have been approved.
But it didn't have the August 1st date.
It had the August 1st date. It didn't have the August 1st date for submittals.
Okay. So that's why we don't see it in, because usually you would see the language in the bill and then you would be adding additional language somewhere. I'm saying that I don't see the August 1st date anywhere except in the new language you're putting in. But
Mr. Swain, can you help me? The August 1st, did we do it by X amount of days or did we use the date August 1st?
Greg Swain from the County Office of Law. I think what happened is this bill doesn't reflect the original date put in because it doesn't duplicate that section. So we
overwrote that section with Mr. Grasso's amendment?
This
Different
is,
section of the bill.
this section 17-2101 was not in the Bill 1518.
Okay.
So this section was added because what Mr. Fink's amendment had done was grandfathered every project that had received approval before August 1st. What this amendment, or what this bill does, is it says if you get your application in by August 1st, you're going to be subject to the old law.
So, okay, so I just want to verify that the date, August 1st, 2018, is in 1518 somewhere.
Yes.
I have it here. Mr. Walker
I
just
know
handed
that's
it to
definitely
me.
the date we discussed.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're not being more generous with the grandfathering that we had previously meant to be, that's all.
Well, I think this is being more generous with the grandfathering, but I think that was the intent.
Well, then,
as relayed to me by Mr. Fink.
okay, well, thank you. I believe if Mr. Grasso has a question, I'll use that time to look through here. I'm sure you guys are right.
Section 2 or 3, Mr. Trumbauer?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Grasso.
I am not a big fan of grandfathering whatsoever, and I don't want anybody to get the impression that I'm trying to soften up on the developers, by no means whatsoever. And if this is just giving them another easy road to create their nightmare for the schools in our district, I'm against it. That's just the way I feel about it. And it sounds like what you're just telling me over here is that we're allowing some more projects to go through. Without this bill, they wouldn't be able to get through. Am I right about that?
Correct.
That's the end of that story. You all know where I stand with this deal. I am not here to make sure our little developers make more money at the taxpayers' expense. And that's really what this is all about, and he knows who I'm talking to. So you know where I'm going with this vote. South.
All right.
Thank
you, Mr. Grasso. Mr. Fink.
No.
Thank you. Just want to remind Mr. Grasso and the rest of the council, I believe this amendment passed 7-0. It certainly passed with your support, Mr. Grasso, and this was absolutely the intent of it. It was part of the discussion. It was just not worded necessarily correctly. So my intent hasn't certainly changed. It's for the submittal. We made a massive change to the law, which certainly had our support. That bill included this amendment, which we discussed, and we talked about an August 1st submittal date. And just because of the wordsmithing of that amendment, it was not included. So all this is doing is simply fixing that, but I'm going to consider an error.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Grasso.
Once again, Mr. Swain, is this amendment or this legislation loosening the doors up to what the council already voted for on the last time? Is it going to allow more projects to slip through before the new law takes place? That's what I'm trying to ask. Hey, let him answer.
Well, the way the amendment is drafted, it allows projects that are submitted between now and August 1st to be governed by the prior law. So the intent of, I believe, as from my discussions with Mr. Fink, of his original amendment was also to provide that window for, and acknowledging that it was a dramatic change that Bill 1518 enacted. So a limited window for projects that were close to being submitted to get in prior to that date. So it would allow anything that's submitted between now and August 1st to be governed by prior law.
Okay. So now what I'm going to say here again is I heard it very clear here that we're going to open the gate up because we feel sorry for some developers. But in the meantime, and I'm grandstanding everybody because I know I'm going to be accused of this. In the meantime, the classrooms are overcrowded, and because we're worried about X and X developers making their money, the heck with the kids, because they need to make some more money, and we overcrowd the classroom. So what we've basically done is just open the door up for some more projects to go through without fixing the problems that we got in the schools, so the developers can make their money, stick it up the taxpayers' butt, the classroom's going to turn around.
Mr. Grasso.
Sorry to be so blunt.
Mr. Grasso.
Put it to the taxpayers, okay, so some developers can make some more money. And that's what this is. And I'm sorry, Mr. Fink, but no, I can't support it. You get the vote on this council, God bless you, but not me.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink.
Mr. Swain, maybe this question's for planning and zoning, but the way the bill passed and the way it is today, could one interpret the language to be submittals on August 1st? Because there was some confusion back and forth before we introduced the bill that, hey, I can read this, and yes, it works August 1st, and then Office of Law kind of looked at it and said, not necessarily, but I think, Phil, you believe that, hey, August 1st would probably be the submittal date.
Mr. Hager?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Phil Hager, Planning and Zoning Officer. I think the intent of what was adopted through these grandfathering provisions was to ensure that there was some level of equity and that there would be an opportunity for people to have their rights protected with regards to the things that had already been in the process for quite some time, for which they had invested, et cetera. So with that in mind, if that was the original date that was utilized was the August date. So with that said, the intent that's being offered today, the expression of intent that was offered by the maker of that motion was that this would include the submittal date of August 1st. I believe that is still captured in the legislation that's before you tonight.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso.
The problem here, Council, is that we don't know the size of these group of people that are going to come in through Mr. Fink's bill. It may be just a project of 1 or 2 houses, and it's no really big harm. But what if it's a project that's got to be 500 or 1,000 houses? We don't know that. And so I just get this gut feeling that we're opening up the chance because, as Mr. Mr. Hager said over here, for people's rights, I get that. Well, what about the little kids' rights in the classroom? What about the teacher that's got to sit there and teach 40-some kids because we're allowing a piece of legislation to go through? They have rights too. And I would bet to you that if you went to the parents of Anne Arundel County, 10 out of 10 of them would tell you they're worried more about their kids in their classroom than if Mr. and Mrs. Developer makes money. And I just, I caution the council here because something could slip through that could be a major big project. And when I see our little developer friends showing up in here in the council room, that tells me something's going on. That's all I'm going to say.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink, can I ask you to hold for just a minute? Mr. Trumbauer has been waiting,
absolutely.
and then I'll get right to you. Okay, Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So during that fascinating debate, I was able to hone in on where I think the change is. So what I see in 1518, and I believe this was your original amendment, Mr. Fink, is Section 3, and be it further enacted that this ordinance shall take effect August 1st, 2018. Okay, so let's reconcile that with the bill under consideration now, which adds a number 11 to 17.2.101B. This is saying an application for sketch plan approval, final plan approval, preliminary plan approval, or approval of a building or grading permit associated with site development plan filed before August 1st, 2018 shall be governed by the previous provisions. Okay, so my question to you guys at the panel is, how far along does a project have to be in order to qualify for this? Like, is an application for sketch plan approval the very first submittal that your office will get, Mr. Hager?
Yes.
So that means that a project that was not previously in your system and may have only been contemplated since the passage of 1518 could presumably submit a application for sketch plan approval on July 31st, 2018 and be considered under the old rules, if you will.
Actually, no, because those projects are going to be part of a relatively lengthy review. Sketch plan is one of the first official approval processes that occurs, but that's not going to be the first time that my office, that INP, that potentially the Transportation Department, that they would have seen that. There would have been a series of meetings that would go on with the consulting engineers, the planners representing the applicant, et cetera. So there is a lengthy process. We don't just typically get something that comes in that way. If it's a single-family home on a lot of that already exists, that's going to be approved a different way, and that's going to go through the grading process, which reflects the language that was also included. And the language here also includes the language that was adopted by, I believe, the APF work group, was it not, when we discussed this very issue?
I can't recall specifically. I mean, I do, after this discussion, I do now appreciate that we agreed to the August 1st implementation date. My only concern with this bill is whether or not it is more lenient to the effect that new projects that weren't even part of the universe could now get in under the wire. Whereas I believe the intent was anybody that had put in some amount of effort and contemplated a project, I think, and it was unanimous, I think we agreed with the original amendment to give them till August 1st. I just don't want to open that door wider than it already is.
Well, if I could answer that question, the original Section 3 in Bill 1518 provided for a deferred effective date of August 1st. But what that means, if you've had your project being reviewed for 2 years, you're looking for final plan approval. When Bill 1518 becomes effective, you're now subject to that requirement. So all of a sudden, you may have had approvals that are going to change because the standard under which you're governed has changed. So the intent of the grandfathering provision in the current bill is to provide a firm cutoff date that if you have an application for either sketch or final plan approval and it's going to be governed and reviewed under the prior law. Now, having said that, as Mr. Hager just indicated, the first formal step for a subdivision approval is a sketch plan application. But there are very few subdivisions that are going to come in blind. You're always going to be meeting with the Office of Planning and Zoning prior to putting in your formal sketch plan application.
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Yes.
Is that a requirement?
It's not a requirement, but it is in practice, it really is.
No, in practice, I understand that. But let's say for the extent of this debate, that I'm a developer, I'm interested in a project, I know the August 1st date is coming up. Is it not possible for me to get together a sketch plan, even if I had not been in contact yet with Mr. Hager's office, which apparently is the best practice and the standard practice? But would it not be possible for me as this hypothetical development to put a sketch plan together, submit it to his office on July 31st, and then, for all intents and purposes, be in under the wire?
No, sir.
It's not.
It's possible for you to put together a sketch plan, but it's not possible for my office to approve it under those conditions.
But it says an application for sketch plan approval.
Somebody might make that application, but I'm not going to approve it.
You're not going to approve it, okay. I mean, the bottom line is, I would be perfectly comfortable with this bill if it didn't have, I believe, if it didn't have an application for sketch plan approval. Because the other things, final plan approval, preliminary plan approval, the building or grading permit, I know that's further down the system. I know that you've already been working to that. The warning flag for me is just that this is the very first step in the process, and we're allowing that to come in too. That's just what's concerning me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. There's a number of people who would like to speak here. I'm going to ask Madam Parliamentarian to ask her question next.
I guess my question is for Mr. Swain or Mr. Hager, because Mr. Hager, you talked about how people have rights under this, developers might have rights to proceed. When, in fact, does the developers, after they've submitted their application, because the bill says submitting the application, it doesn't say anything about approval. How long does a developer have from submitting a sketch plan application to actually getting tested for APF? How long do they have for that?
Well, I can answer that part. The developer has the choice of vesting for APF approval at sketch or at final. As far as how much time that takes, that's sort of an internal practice.
Because
but
they
usually,
can get extensions and other items from the Office of Planning and Zoning along the way, correct?
Correct. But under the current APF test, it's the open-close chart. So it really is, it's a binary choice. So as soon as, I mean, the vesting would not take place, I imagine, until the sketch plan is approved.
Right.
That's a triggering event. So it's not, you could not bring a sketch plan in July 31st and be vested by August 1st. You could not.
That's correct. But you would still have the option of pursuing your plan under the old law versus the new.
Under the current bill, correct.
That is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Prusky, are you?
Yeah, I got a mic. So I'm looking at this the other way. The prior bill, we didn't specifically identify what could or could not be done, but now we are. Is there a benefit to that? I understand we're talking about the date, but I just want to be clear, Greg, if this is something that actually now makes it concrete about what's allowed, what's not allowed. I don't know if I'm looking at it a different angle, maybe I'm wrong, but help me.
Well, I think under the prior bill, it simply provided for that effective date, and really what that means for this type of land use legislation is as of August 1st, those new standards apply. So unless you've already vested under sketch approval or final plan approval, you're going to be subject to the new requirements. What this bill, what Bill 6418 does is it sets that deadline. You come in on August 2nd, say, you're absolutely subject to the new bill. And that's going to be whether you're a final plan approval or a sketch plan approval.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fink.
Thank you. I didn't think this bill would have that much discussion. I thought we kind of settled this on the amendment, so I apologize to everyone because I did think it was pretty easy when I brought this up. Mr. Hager, how long, Mr. Grasso brings up the 2 and the 4 home sketch plans, no big deal, and then he went into 500. If a developer wanted to build 500 homes, how long do you think it would take to get that application together?
Months or years?
Years. What about if you wanted to build 100 homes?
It'd still be a pretty significant undertaking because there's so many different things to review, coordination of all the different comments.
I mean, so the application isn't their name and address, and then they sign off, and that's a done deal, right?
But no, it's quite exhaustive. It involves the reviewing and commenting by multiple agencies, the fire marshal, state agencies, state highway administration.
So if I was going to build 10 homes, could I start on that project tomorrow and get in by August 1st, in your best guess?
No.
Could I have started on June 15th?
Unlikely.
Okay. So, folks, I don't think that when this bill passes tomorrow, all of a sudden, developers say, hey, we better hurry up and go buy a piece of property and start the sketch approval. And that was one of my questions in the very beginning before we did the amendment, because I'm sensitive to that. But my point was that somebody that's been working on this project for 6 or 7 months, who has probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, the game plan just up and changes. And this certainly isn't for the person that's been thinking about buying a piece of land, thinking about moving forward on something to hurry up and get it in. I think that would be something that's needed much more time. And in fact, before I submitted this original amendment, Mr. Grasso and I went back and forth on the amount of days to give. And I think we settled on 45 days, which just happened to be around that August 1st deadline. And I think I was looking for something closer to 90 days. So this was kind of the compromise that I thought I compromised with the sponsor of the bill. And that's kind of how I came to this August 1st deadline. But I guess I'm rambling now. But my point is, the August 1st deadline doesn't allow anybody to go out, hurry up and find a piece of property to build 100, 200 homes, 10 homes, it sounds like even, and get in under this bill. This is just for somebody that's been well into the pipeline, been working on it a while, gives them an opportunity to hurry up and get it in. And if they get it in, then they can continue to go forward. And if they don't, they're going to abide by the new rules on August 2nd. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is that Mr. Grasso?
Yeah, originally, if I remember correctly, when I put this legislation in, I think the administration wanted to go to September, and I said, no, let's do it now. Councilman Smith turned around and said, okay, well, let's play nice, boys, and we moved it to July 1st. I think the beginning of the tax year is what it was. Does that sound about right? And then somehow we migrated to August. So the argument that Mr. Fink is making is a good one, so now I make the next argument and said, if that's the case, then what do we need his bill for? So that's pretty much where I'm at with that. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Pruski, go ahead.
Just one quick follow-up, Mr. Hager, and this is a trivia question. What's the fastest application you ever approved?
I'm afraid that's not an appropriate question for me based on my 11 months here. I haven't seen one yet that hasn't been in the hopper for years.
Okay. Thank you.
May I, thank you. First, for my own benefit, may I ask a question just to kind of clarify? The date of August 1st was in the prior amendment. The date of August 1st is in this bill. So the date hasn't changed. So what is acceptable and triggers, what is acceptable at that date is being more specifically laid out in this bill? Is that really what we have going on here?
Under the prior amendment, Bill 1518 became effective on August 1st.
Became effective.
Now, what Bill 6418 does is it grandfathers projects that are applied, that have an application submitted before August 1st. So that's a difference. That is the difference.
Okay, so the date hasn't changed, but what is acceptable as of the date has now been clarified.
What is not subject to the effective Bill 1518 has been clarified. Right.
Thank you very much. Is there anything further? Gosh, where are we? Thank you. We will now open the public hearing on Bill number 6418. Does anybody like to testify on Bill 6418? Please come down at this time. Do we already do this? Yes. Oh, excuse me. Do we have a public hearing on 6418 already? Yes. I apologize. We must have, because I've already got some underlined here. Excuse me. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Bill number 6418.
Bill number 6418, an ordinance concerning subdivision development, general provisions, adequate public facilities.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on Bill number 6418.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
No.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
No.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
5 in the affirmative, 2 in the negative. Bill number 6418 is passed.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1518.
Resolution number 1518, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County restricting the county council to increase the minimum value of purchases and contracts requiring full competitive bidding from $25,000 to an amount not less than $25,000 and not greater than $50,000, or a greater amount determined by the county council to be in the best interest of the county, and requiring that the award of contracts greater than $5,000 and less than the minimum dollar requirement for full competitive bidding shall be awarded through a simplified competitive process, except as otherwise provided by law, and requiring that the county purchasing agent shall cause to be published on the Anne Arundel County website all awards of contracts through the full and simplified bidding process for capital improvements, contractual services, professional services, or supplies of $5,000 or greater awarded by the county in accordance with the Anne Arundel County Code.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's office. With me at the table, Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law, Christine Romans, and Andrew Heim from Central Services. As you all remember, council 2 years ago unanimously passed an amendment to the charter, which unfortunately did not pass the voters, that would have raised the threshold from $25,000 to $75,000. This is an attempt to redo this charter amendment with more public transparency as far as the bids that are received, as well as at a lower threshold of $50,000, as well as adding in and guaranteeing a competitive nature of the process. The revised simplified procurement threshold for goods and services will increase the efficiency in conducting the competitive procurements while maintaining the intent of a competitive procurement process. This charter amendment will provide the additional reporting for procurements $5,000 or greater on our county website. The amendment also removes the barriers and time commitments and the risk for small minority businesses wanting to respond to the competitive bid for procurements up to below $50,000. Finally, the amendment gives the county council the authority to adjust the simplified procurement threshold should the council feel that the county would benefit from a higher simplified procurement threshold in the future. Again, we are trying to increase the efficiency of this procurement process, and we can have staff better focus on other higher threshold agency needs. At this time, we have a quick slide to walk the council through that Andrew Heim will walk the council through on the important provisions of the bill and the changes that we're looking to make.
Thank you.
You all should have that presentation in front of you.
Thank you very much. This is Andrew Heim, purchasing agent. To get started, if you guys want to go ahead and flip over to the second page, we will get started with a review of the simplified and full procurement discussions that are part of this bill. A simplified procurement process is still a competitive procurement process, but by conducting at least a minimum of 3 or more quotes for the goods or services. It's more straightforward. It's an opportunity for competing at an easier level, and we estimate that those procurements can be completed in approximately about 30 days. A full procurement process requires a publicly released competitive solicitation that requires an extensive planning and competition. It's also very time-consuming and requires a very uniform process. So our average right now for that is about 65 business days. Now, if you guys want to go ahead and flip over to page 3 here, we can talk about the benefits to the county. As we wanted to highlight with this, there's several different areas of this that will provide benefit to the county. First off, the current threshold set at $25,000 requires a tremendous amount of administrative process, not only for purchasing as well as other county agencies. There's more steps in this administrative process, meaning more opportunities for miscommunications and failures in the process. These small dollar procurements can be operated more effectively and more efficiently and reduce errors by going through and having us focus on more value-add procurements to our county operations and allowing for a more simplified process to conduct procurements using the under $50,000 threshold. Finally, a simpler procurement process would mean a potential for vendors who are small, minority, and local businesses to be able to participate in a greater capacity with the county, and we'll get into later on how that's going to happen. So let's move over to page 4, and we talk about how this would be administered. Procurements for less than $50,000 will be competed by obtaining a minimum, as I stated, 3 quotes. We can either do that as just obtaining those 3 quotes, or we can conduct a request for quote, which is still a publicly released solicitation. Vendors and contractors for procurements less than $50,000 will be set up in the new e-procurement system, which is known as PORTS, and will be classified by their NIGP classification code, which will allow them to be able to be selected by purchasing based on the businesses that they participate in. We will also be able to provide improved transparency with this process by being able to post all solicitations that are over $5,000 on the county website through our new e-procurement system. So doing that, let's move over and talk about in a little bit more detail on page 5 here on how this is going to help small, minority, and local businesses to be able to participate in the procurement process. It's going to reduce the number of administrative steps for small businesses to be able to respond to solicitations. They'll also be able to reduce the liability and risk for small, minority, and local businesses to be able to participate in the solicitation process because, first off, there'll be fewer terms and conditions that they'll have to review. The contract mechanism that they'll have to be able to receive will be a purchase order or a simpler award process, and awards will be able to be made faster. So what that boils down to is more procured goods and services performed and paid faster. It'll be easier for awards to be processed, and that the vendors will have the opportunity to be able to register for all the different categories of business that they operate, so they'll have a bigger opportunity to expand their footprint beyond just the simple goods and services. By selecting one category, they'll get a wide expanse of that. So by doing that, let's go ahead and move on to page 6. And one of the things that might come up as a question is an example. Is there an example out there currently that we can use to be able to demonstrate that this is successful? And one thing to look at on page 6 here is talking about on acquisitions.gov. FAR Part 13, which is the Simplified Acquisitions Procedures. And obviously, FAR Part 13 has been created for a number of reasons, but one of the major purposes, which is highlighted under Section 13.002 purpose, is really, again, to provide improved opportunities for small disadvantaged, woman-owned, veteran-owned, hub zone, service-disabled, veteran-owned, small businesses concerns to obtain fair and proportionate government contracts. And I wanted to point out, I bring this as an example because not only is this, the federal government's effort to try and create a threshold, but also to simplify the procurement process for small businesses, for disadvantaged businesses, but it's also an opportunity for them to be able to reevaluate this from time to time. And as what's occurred in the fiscal year 18 National Defense Authorization Act, the threshold is being increased again, which it was increased to $100,000 several years ago. It's now being increased again to $250,000. So again, the main takeaway of this example is that these thresholds need to be revised from time to time. It also increases the efficiency for procurement operations and provides benefit for local, small, and disadvantaged businesses. All right, so using and moving on from that, let's talk about how this would impact the procurements within the county. And before, as we get into slide 7, I just want to point out what we see here in front of us with a total spend before and after is really just the impacted procurements. Those procurements, the IFB, the RFP, the invitation for a bid, the request for proposal, that'll be impacted by this. Some other procurement processes, like our sole source and construction contracts, wouldn't be impacted by this. But again, looking at the data that's available here, one of the things you'll notice is that our IFBs do decrease from using the calendar year, or I'm sorry, the FY17 data. This is all from FY17. You're seeing a decrease from 272 IFBs, invitation for bids, down to 216. And you're seeing a reduction of about 5 RFPs. So again, the data that's being provided here shows that it's not a great impact on the total dollars spent for the procurement organization as a whole related to our IFBs and our RFPs. But I do think that if we move on here to page 8, you'll see that although this only represents 0.6% of the total annual spend for the county, that $2.6 million equate to about 61 procurements that would be able to be operated through a simplified or simpler procurement process, which is going to free up resources not only internal to the county, but provide more opportunities for small and local businesses and businesses in this area to be able to participate in a simpler procurement process. So I close with the last slide here on page 9. Some neighboring jurisdictions in the area that have thresholds either at $25,000, micro purchase thresholds at $25,000 or higher. And again, I think this is a good indication of where we'd like to go.
Thank you. Any questions? Madam Auditor.
Yes, I have one question. I wanted to clarify on page 4. You say procurement valued at less than 50 will be competed by obtaining 3 quotes or conducting an open request for quote. Don't you mean between 5,000 and 50,000?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes, because anything under 5,000, you can pretty much do what you want to. Go get a price on whatever product you want to buy. Okay, and then I brought up one thing in the blue letter that I don't know if you're going to address. In the language that's proposed, it's called 2 different things. Let's see. It's called a simplified competitive process, and then it's later referred to as a simplified bidding process. And I think they need to be the same, and I think if you called it a simplified bidding process, it would infer that you were actually going to get bids. And that's not what you're doing. You can go out and get 3 quotes from any site on the internet that you want. So that wouldn't qualify as a bid.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. May I ask a question? I know what a small business is, and I can kind of tell what a local business is. What is a disadvantaged business?
Well, and this is Andrew Heim, purchasing agent. A disadvantaged business at the federal level is a classification of small business that's recognized by the SBA, and there's different other classifications that go along with that. Here in the county, we don't have a specific organization to that. to be able to classify that, but we do, with our new e-procurement system, we'll be able to at least record what small business classification that they represent that they are.
They'll represent that they're a disadvantaged business, and I'm assuming somewhere in the Federal Register there's a definition of a disadvantaged business.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Anything further? Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution Number 1518. Oh, excuse me, I did it again. It's a long night, I apologize. We will now have a public hearing on Resolution 1518. There's no sign up. Anybody who wants to testify on Resolution 1518, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, we will now close the public hearing on Resolution 1518. Now, Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1518.
Resolution number 1518, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County restricting the County Council to increase the minimum value of purchases and contracts requiring full competitive bidding from $25,000 to an amount not less than $25,000 and not greater than $50,000, or a greater amount determined by the County Council to be in the best interest of the county, and requiring that the award of contracts greater than $5,000 and less than the minimum dollar requirement for full competitive bidding shall be awarded through a simplified competitive process except as otherwise provided by law, and requiring that the county purchasing agent shall cause to be published on the Anne Arundel County website all awards of contracts through the full and simplified bidding process for capital improvements, contractual services, professional services, or supplies of $5,000 or greater awarded by the county in accordance with Anne Arundel County Code.
Thank you, Madam Auditor.
Yes, before we complete this process, I wanted to ask Ms. Blair, do you agree that that wording has to be changed and not refer to a simplified bidding process?
I think, Lori Blair, Deputy County Attorney, I think if I'm looking at where you're talking about, the one time it talks about a simplified competitive process, but in the other place it says a full and it's referring to both.
Yes,
so it
a
says
full and simplified bidding processes,
which would include bidding, that would include IFBs and RFPs. So I think it's just because it's plural, it's referring to both categories there, that it's been worded that way. So I'm not really concerned about that wording meaning something different.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify that this caps it at 50,000. And in order to move that number again, it would have to come back to the council through another charter change, correct?
No.
That's what I thought I heard.
No.
So the council could then, going forward, change the dollar amount to any amount it wants.
To give them more flexibility, yes.
Up to 50,000. It would go over 50,000. So the voters so the voters rejected the 75,000 that we put forward last time.
Correct.
And so now we're showing them the $50,000 number, but we're also opening the door to say that a future council could come back and raise the number above the 50,000 without going back to the voters. And
correct. Correct. So to provide that it's up to $50,000. So we have to. There's several steps in this, right? So if the voters approve this in the fall, we have to come back and do legislation with the council to go up to whatever the number is the council is comfortable with. And then the council has the ability going forward to adjust that number over $50,000. The idea being that every time we're trying to adjust these procurement numbers in the future, we don't have to continuously go back to do a charter amendment to adjust that.
So they said no to 75, but technically we're showing them 50. Technically, you could come back after the amendment, assuming it passes, the council could raise it to 50 and then come right back with another bill and raise it to 75. Is that correct? Or 100?
The council could,
200.
yes.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Anything else?
Actually, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Walker, for raising that point. So considering that, Mr. Marzik, Actually, I don't know if it's in the bill itself, but will the language that will be on the ballot make that clear?
Yes, it's in the bill itself.
Okay.
It's in the resolution.
Because I
If you look at
appreciate-
lines 20 through 30, that is what the language will be on the ballot.
Okay. And there's no upper limit?
Correct.
Okay.
Madam Auditor,
I guess
please.
then I don't understand why you would even mention $50,000 in the language in the charter. If you really don't have an upper limit, you're really not setting it at 50. You're saying it's currently 25, and you can go up to whatever you want to. Why put 50?
Well,
Why even
may I, Madam Auditor, may I just interject with my understanding and ask if it's correct? There is a 50,000 number, but the top limit is being taken away from the citizens and given to the council. Is that a correct way of understanding it? Okay. Mr. Marzick, have you?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Fink?
There's not an amendment on this, is there? I'm going to, just put on record, I'm going to request that we hold this bill. Mr. Walker brings up a good point, and hopefully we can work that out and get a concrete number in there. And an amendment, hopefully, at the next meeting.
Okay.
Is there
second
time for the? It's been moved and seconded.
need to have a motion. Who's going to do the
I made a motion, Andrew.
Yeah.
Seconded.
Any discussion of that motion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on the motion to hold.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on resolution number 1518, it is passed.
Passed. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of resolution.
When will it come back for vote, sir?
This will come back for vote on July 16th, 2018.
For the record. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please read the title of resolution 1618.
Thank you, Andrew.
Resolution number 1618, resolution approving the declaration of certain unimproved county-owned property formerly known as a portion of Drum Point Avenue between Governor Ritchie Highway and lots 5082, 5083, and 5084 in Glen Burnie, Maryland as surplus property.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Samantha Harris, Christine Romans from Central Services, and Christine Nider from the Office of Law. As part of the County Executive's overall comprehensive review of county-owned properties, this is the first of 2 properties before you that was identified as being surplus to the county's needs. This property is located in Glen Burnie, as Ms. Gray noted. The parcel is 1,850 square feet, or 0.042 acres. The property is less than 1/10 of an acre and is non-buildable. We actually had a mistake in the drafting of both these resolutions. We'll have amendments at the appropriate time to make these as non-buildable surplus properties. The request to purchase this property was initiated by the owner of the abutting property, who currently uses the land for parking, and they plan to use the land for parking in the future. We provided the council with a map of the surrounding area. We'd be happy to answer any questions the council has.
Thank you. Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the auditor's blue letter, she mentions that the CAO did not sign it as required. Is that correct?
At about 4 p.m. or something today, I got copies from them that had the CAO signature on it.
So it's all
Yeah, so
legit.
they existed originally, but the real estate office did not have them in their file. So that concern has been taken care of.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trumbauer. Any other discussion? Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Grasso.
You know, being it's my area, I just want to double check So I heard everything Mr. Marsick said, and we talked about it earlier, and I just want to make sure that this doesn't trigger a possible development of some sort, even though it makes it clear that it doesn't, but I just want to hear him say that it doesn't trigger any kind of development going on up in my neck of the woods.
No, sir.
Okay,
It will
neither
not tri-
piece
it
of,
will
neither
not-
piece of property, right?
Neither piece of property will trigger development in your.
So I want to make sure. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Auditor.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up another point. This is a strip of property along Ritchie Highway in front of several businesses. Right now it's grass, I believe, right? And it's between the parking lot and Ritchie Highway. And what I wanted them to clarify their intentions as to who might be interested in this. Is it going to the businesses?
Correct. That's who was interested and actually brought, Samantha Harris, real estate manager. That's correct. The owner of the adjacent property brought the property to us and actually gave us the information. So we did the research and followed through the surplus process.
And they want to, do we know what they're going to do with it?
Yes, they want to use it for parking.
More parking? So the parking would go right up to the side of the road?
Yes.
Okay. So I also had a question about the ownership of it, because when we were, it was very confusing to try to follow through the plats and stuff, and we didn't have all the land records in front of us to follow the surveyor's documents. I just wanted to hear maybe the Office of Law confirm that we do in fact own that strip of land.
Yes, Christine Meter with the Office of Law. We did review the plat from the State Roads Commission showing that this property abuts Ritchie Highway, and also the Real Estate Division inquired with the commission as far as whether or not they were interested in acquiring this, if they had a need for it, and they said they did not.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, then we will open the public hearing on Resolution 1618. If anybody would like to testify on 1618, please come down at this time. Ms. Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland.
That's correct.
I raise concerns because when the State Highway Administration says, oh, it's fine with us, that means there goes the vegetation. This county has been really denuded, with from all the kinds of vegetation. I understand business is really important. We really need jobs. We really need a lot of parking area. But I'm also concerned about the future expansion of Ritchie Highway, because there's also a tendency to sort of say, well, we don't need it now, and then suddenly later we do. And I just don't understand. Is everything going to be paved over? Is everything going to be impervious? I mean, how can we recharge the aquifers for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren? I mean, the water's got to sink into the soil if there's going to be groundwater in 100 years and in 200 years. And it's not going to get there if you pave it over. And I'm really concerned about where are the provisions for saying, yes, we need the parking, but if you're going to benefit from it that way, you've got to protect everybody else's water supply. Thank you. Oh, I left out the heating and air conditioning. The more impervious surface you have, the asphalt absorbs the heat. You add to the global warming issue and the climate change issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. We will now close the public hearing on Resolution 1618. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1618.
Resolution number 1618, resolution approving the declaration of certain unimproved county-owned property formerly known as a portion of Drum Point Avenue between Governor Ritchie Highway and lots 5082, 5083, and 5084 in Glen Burnie, Maryland as surplus property.
Thank you. There's an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read Amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment clarifies and specifies the requirements for disposing of non-buildable county-owned property by private disposition.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Motion to adopt?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second?
Second.
Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, this was just a mistake in drafting. This should have been drafted originally as a non-buildable resolution, so this amendment just clarifies that this is a non-buildable lot. Non-buildable, Mr. Grasso.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Walker?
It's not buildable, but it's going to be used as parking, though, like you
Correct.
said.
It's currently used as
So
parking.
it's currently used as parking?
Yes.
They're just parking on it. Is it paved or?
It is?
Yes.
It is paved. We paved it?
Can you answer on the record?
Yes, it's paved.
They paved our property?
We got a trespass.
And we allowed them to do it, I guess, I'm assuming?
No, we did not allow them to do it. Once they realized that they didn't own that property, they came to us. We did the research through the survey to make sure that we did own it, and then we're bringing it to you.
How many parking lot spots did they get
It's
out of
about
paving?
4. But it's not the full parking spot. They were able to pull, it's about half of a parking spot of 6 spots.
They paved half of a spot?
It's about 6 parking spots, but it's about half of the space was our property. Does that make sense?
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Grasso?
I like to always remind everybody that there's no we own that kind of stuff. The taxpayer owned that property, okay? So when you say it was ours, ours is the taxpayer.
Correct.
And so these people just turned around and took a little bit of a piece of property that they already owned. And that's the way we need to explain it to people, okay? It's no us and them. It's we, the government, the people. So keeping that for a point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Grasso, for civics lesson. Where are we? Madam Secretary, okay, we're on amendment. Madam Secretary, please read the title of amendment number 1. No.
Yeah. I think it's time to call the roll.
Call the roll.
Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
And is there, that's it, right? Just one amendment.
And we can vote on the amendment.
All right, so we can vote on the amendment. Madam Secretary, please
I mean,
call
on
the roll
on the resolution.
on resolution number 1618 as amended.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution number 1618 as amended is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, please read the title of resolution number 1718.
Resolution number 1718, resolution approving the declaration of certain unimproved county-owned property formerly known as a portion of Drum Point Avenue between Governor Ritchie Highway and lots 5079, 5080, and 5081 in Glen Burnie, Maryland as surplus property.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Bernie Marzick, the County Executive's Office, with me at the table, Samantha Harris and Christine Romans from Central Services, Christine Nieder, from the Office of Law. Again, this is another property similar to the prior discussion. This is for property, again, located in Glen Burnie. This property is 1,891 square feet or 0.043 acres. And this is less than 1/10 of an acre and suitable as a designation of a non-buildable property. Again, there was a mistake in drafting. We'll have the amendment at the appropriate time. This, again, was a request from the adjacent property owner to purchase this property from the county, which is currently being used for parking, and it will be used for parking in the future.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, we will open the public hearing on resolution number 1718. If anybody would like to testify on 1718, please come down at this time. Seeing no movement, we will close the hearing on resolution number 1718. It is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of resolution 1718.
Resolution number 1718, resolution approving the declaration of certain unimproved county-owned property formerly known as a portion of Drum Point Avenue between Governor Ritchie Highway and lots 5079, 5080, and 5081 in Glen Burnie, Maryland as surplus property.
Thank you. There's an amendment. Madam Secretary, please read amendment number 1.
Amendment number 1. This amendment clarifies and specifies the requirements for disposing of non-buildable county-owned property by private disposition.
Thank you. Motion to adopt?
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Madam. Mr. Marzick.
Again, Mr. Chairman, this just clarifies that this is a non-buildable lot and will follow the non-buildable surplus process.
Okay, is there any further discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gresso.
Yes, I remember just about a month ago, constituent was reaching out because they wanted to, is this the property, the same one that these people wanted to pave part of the county? There was, some of their parking lot was theirs and some of it was the county's, if we want to call it that, and they wanted to pave and we didn't want them to do that. Is this the same one?
Christine Roman, Central Services Officer. No, it's not the same one. The
Okay.
property you're thinking of is near Post Road 40 and behind it's close to the Glen Burnie Garage. This
Okay.
is not this property.
Just in the future, you know, maybe I don't have the right to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When people want to make an improvement to their property, and if it's county property right next to it like they wanted to do, don't give them a hard way about paving if they want to put the tar over there. And if the county doesn't want to pay for it, and it's $100 or something like that, and we make the people feel better, you know who to call, right? We don't want to alienate. We don't want to alienate the people because, you know, here they're trying to make their place look nice. And if I was trying to make my lot look good and it was county property over there, I would probably try to squeeze the county for a couple dollars too. But we didn't want to give it to them. But in any case, maybe the response we always want to say to them is sure, go ahead and do it, but it's on your dime. But, you know, of course, you'd have them sign a waiver so if they did something and got hurt. You understand on that, right?
Absolutely, Mr. Councilman. Once we understood the full extent of what they were asking of us, we approved it.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gresso. Madam Secretary, anything further? Madam Secretary, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Amendment number 1 is adopted.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on resolution number 1718 as amended.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso.
Aye.
Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. Resolution number 1718 as amended is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of resolution number 1818. Thank you.
Resolution number 1818, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to eliminate the 1,500-hour per year limit for contractual temporary employees.
Thank you. Mr. Marzick.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, Bernie Marzick from the County Executive's Office. With me at the table, Andy Rhodes from Personnel, Kelly Lovett from the Office of Law, and Esther Parker from, who's a Child Care Center Director for County Rec and Parks. Resolution 1818 would eliminate the mandate that temporary or contractual positions may not work more than 1,500 hours in a calendar year. Should this pass and the voters approve, the administration will require that any temporary or contractual position that is to work more than 1,500 hours must have approval of the Chief of Staff. This will eliminate the staffing shortage that may occur when child care employees at Rec and Parks are required to attend a set number of mandatory training hours in addition to the mandatory staffing ratios. So if possible, we'd like to have Rec and Park staff explain the need here. This is primarily a Rec and Parks issue where staffing staff are running up against the 1,500-hour limit, so we're proposing to eliminate that limit.
Thank you.
Say your name on the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Esther Parker. I reside at 508 Nectar Court in Odenton. I have been a Center Director with Recreation and Parks for 24 years. I come before you to ask you to please give this some thought. This affects the residents of Anne Arundel County. Child care falls under now the State Department of Education. When we started years ago, the 1,500 hours, we could have it work. As it stands now, the state can change requirements, which makes the qualifications for staff better, which then has an impact on the students, and the families then feel that their children are in a facility that is well supervised and the staff are qualified, highly qualified. At this time, 1,500 hours, as some of you might know, you deal with the school schedules, or if you're parents, when school is in, we're there. I sometimes refer to it as it's not a stack of papers. We can't move them over because the students do need to come. The 1,500 hours has now gotten to the point where I can tell you there are staff when October, November rolls around, they cannot work. This now puts the center at risk for not being staffed properly. I know no one here would want us to be in that predicament. Quality childcare is at a premium. I am proud to say Anne Arundel County Recreation and Park, when I started some 24 years ago, there were about 15 centers. We're now 30 plus, and we're not just doing before and after. We're now doing full childcare. So it's imperative that this be considered. We don't control when the State Department of Education changes qualifications. So when that happens, it does not give us a waiver that we don't get those requirements done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any question?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Tate, and then Mr. Smith. Is that okay?
Sure. I just had a question in terms of this change completely eliminates the threshold. So I don't know whether Ms. Lovett or Ms. Rhodes would like to speak if we go from having a 1,500-hour threshold to no threshold at all. Is there a reason why it was completely eliminated instead of in favor of going to like 1,800 hours or something like that?
Well, with dealing with Andrea Rhodes, personnel officer, with dealing with Recs and Parks and the number of hours they feel they need, it's approximately 2,080, a full-time position. So we eliminated it because I didn't know what's the right number. Is it 18? Is it 19? We felt 2,080 or a normal work year would be something that we could work with the department.
Do we have, how many people do we have at Rec and Parks that are considered contractual temporary, but they work full-time?
Well, right now, we don't have any that work full-time because they can't work more than 1,500 hours. The only people that can work full-time are those that are partially grant-funded. So we do have some temporary contractual employees that are grant-funded. They can work 2,080 hours. These are enterprise-funded positions, so it's not the general fund. We have about 300 employees in child care. How many, Ms. Parker, do you believe would work 2,080?
We're at the point now, it's like a Band-Aid approach. The 2,080 needs to go. I have full confidence in the department to look at how we utilize that. Someone who sits in a position as myself as a director, whether staff is there or not, I have to make it work. The administrative pieces that goes with it can't go away. It's mandated by COMA. And as the state changes regulations, we have to stay in compliance with it. Our counterparts around the surrounding areas have dealt with this a little earlier than we did. We are now up against the wall.
Thank you. I'm sorry, were you finished? Mr. Smith?
So I know this was sort of probably initiated by Recs and Park and the child care, and you said there were 300 roughly contractual employees?
Correct, just in the child care.
Correct. How many contractor employees in the county that this might apply to?
I would say less than 50 that we would be looking for an exception on. The majority of our employees, our temporary employees, work maybe 500, 600 hours. I'd say less than 50 that we would ask for any exception. Okay. And we don't know because we really haven't dealt with any of the departments other than Recs and Parks as this being a serious issue for their staffing.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Proust.
Yes, Ms. Parker, first of all, thank you for your service as a constituent and the work that you've done. I appreciate it. Ms. Rhodes, I have a question, and again, did the public safety, or not public safety, but did any of the public representatives in terms of unions or anybody impacted by this get notified and discussion. Again, I don't want this a veiled attempt to take away benefits or full-time jobs. If this is really Parks and Rec's, fine, but I just, let's say what it is. So-
I met with all of the unions last week. They were all in a meeting with me. I talked to them about the resolution. They all understood the issue. No one had any issue.
All right, thank you. And for the record, we do need to pay our child care workers more money, but we'll let the county executive handle that. Thank you.
Madam Auditor? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Walker.
That's all right, I'll defer to her first.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. This is a Rec and Parks issue. If it's just a Rec and Parks issue, is there why are we doing it for everybody and not just for them? Why wouldn't you make the wording specific to childcare?
I think we decided to remove the 1,500 hour because at times there are the instances where we may need to be able to work somebody more than 1,500 hours. So I think we just thought this is going to really be mandated by the budget. There's no intention to have all temporary employees work full-time. As I said, the majority of them work 500 to 600 hours. But it was to give us the ultimate flexibility in being able to manage the staff.
Okay, so are there any other instances where we have temporary contractual employees working full-time? These people aren't going to get any benefits, right? Health or pension?
They do not get pension or health. The only temporaries that get those benefits are those that are grant-funded, and if it's in the grant that pays for those. The only thing they'll get is the state-mandated sick and safe leave, which allows them 30 hours a year to use for sick or domestic violence.
And Ms. Lovett, that's all the law requires?
Kelly Lovett, Office of Law, that's all that the law would require in terms of quote-unquote mandated benefits by state law.
Okay.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have this situation at Parks and Recs, and I'm sympathetic to that, but my understanding is this would apply countywide to all departments and employees. So all other agencies that fall under county government that are limited to the 1,500 hours currently would have this cap removed.
No, our intention is to put into place an admin pro that says all temporary contractual employees cannot work more than 1,500 hours unless there is a request and a waiver approved by the chief of staff. So we're not eliminating the 1,500 hours, we're just eliminating it from the charter with all intentions of continuing to do the 1,500 hour unless there's a need.
So all that would have to happen would be the chief of staff would have to sign off on it, and then somebody could work more than 1,500.
That's the way we're proposing the admin pro.
Including, let's just say, like the state's attorney's office as an example.
Most of the positions in the state's attorney's office, temporary and contractual, are grant funded and can work 2,080 hours. So there might be one or two, Mr. Walker, that are bound by the 1,500, but most of their temps are grant funded.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. How long have we? Good evening. Thanks for your work. And how long have we been doing child care at Recs and Parks?
So I've been there 24 years, and it's ironic to say when Recreation and Park started doing it, my son, I was working in Washington, it's about 30 years now.
Okay.
I'm going to look to the back. Am I correct? Okay, I thought I had my math right.
Do we compete, does Recs and Parks compete with private organizations that do child care?
So I'm going to put
using compete in quotes, kind of,
Okay, so I'm going to put my advocacy hat on. Here is one of the things that happens. There is childcare. This is run through an enterprise fund. So for the parents, the citizens of the county, they pay just about less compared to the private sector childcare providers charge. The requests have been coming in more and more for more programs to be opened. If you talk about safety, the programs that we run are based in the school building, so then there's a relationship with the school. For the families, it is very beneficial to them. The kids don't have to be transported somewhere else. And from someone who raised two young men in this county, childcare is at a premium. And so to go from when I first got there to now we're at 30-something plus, and requests keep coming in. But again, we've got this 1,500 hours.
Requests for more children to be taken care of.
Requests, one, for more children to be in, and requests for more programs to be opened. And the programs don't just run during the year. So let's make sure we understand this. Childcare is childcare. When school ends, parents still have to go to work.
Okay.
And so then we now go to an 11-hour program, 7 in the morning to 6 at night. So the staff, that to keep lack of turnover, which is not good for any child in staffing, it becomes difficult. So those people who work the summer, when the school year starts, they might make it through September, October, but by November, they are out of hours.
The 1,500 hours.
They're out of the 1,500 hours.
And you mentioned one of the other things that you're up against is that the state changes the rules here again.
Well, the state changes rules, but again, as a childcare advocate and an advocate for quality education, what our state has done, if you compare it across the country, we are in the forefront with what we're doing with childcare.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Trumbauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marzik, maybe we already covered this, but the word temporary in here, does that mean that it's less than the calendar year, or is there some proviso there? Because we're changing the language, we're proposing to change the language to say any person assigned to an hourly, contractual, temporary position. And one of my original concerns was, well, if we allow anybody to be contractual for any time, we're threatening, the full-time merit folks. But I think the word temporary is the protection against that. But it occurred to me that that's not defined in the charter, and I wonder who makes the decision on what temporary is.
I'll defer to Ms. Rhodes on this.
Andy Rhodes, Personnel Officer. Temporary means, Councilman Trumbauer, that it's not a budgeted position. So it's not a position that you see identified in every department. It's temporary. There has to be money in a contractual temporary line item in the budget in order to hire someone. But
And
it's
that-
not a budgeted position.
And that position would not persist into the next budget year.
It does not have to, no, sir. If the funding would be cut, that temporary position would be eliminated.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get my head around this, and I seem to be asking some hypothetical questions tonight, so forgive me. But if I was an agency head and I wanted to hire a position, a contractual position, I could do that, and that position now would no longer be constrained to 1,500 hours if I did it outside the budget process. Is that correct?
The way we envision with the admin pro is the department head would have to get approval to hire a temp beyond 1,500 hours from the chief of staff. Otherwise, the limit would be put into place of 1,500 hours.
Okay, so could the county executive hire someone at 2,000 hours a year and call them temporary?
You'd have to have the money to do it.
You have to have the money in the budget to pay for that temporary.
Okay.
So temporaries can be hired throughout the year, but the first thing we do is make sure that the budget department authorizes that the funds are available.
I mean, look, so
Mr. Trumbauer, if I may, we had a situation with Derek Matthews. He ran into the 1,500-hour limit, and we moved him into a full-time position, right?
Correct.
Right, into a full-time position.
Right, and if
because
that
he was going to exceed the 1,500 hours.
So is he still contractual?
No.
No, he moved into a budgeted position.
Is he happy to be in the merit position?
I think he's happy.
I mean, I'm just, what I'm worried about is if this is providing the administration an incentive to do an end around merit positions. I mean, I don't think that's your intent, but I'm worried about that potentially happening. I mean, if this was only about the Rec and Park childcare positions, you made a great case. I'm totally on board. I'm just worried that this could be applied to the state's attorney's office, some other place like that, and I'm just wanting to make sure.
But it can only be applied if there's funding for those positions, right? So you all have the final approval of all the budgets. So if you don't have money in state's attorney's office to hire a contractual position, you can't hire a contractual position.
So the oversight comes through the budget process, even though it's not a budgeted position.
And you cannot put them into a budgeted position if one doesn't exist. So you pass how many positions they have each year that are budgeted and how much money each year they have for temporary contractual employees. So the control is at the budget time.
And so for FY19, that number is already set for the Rec and Parks. That's right.
But they're enterprise funded, so if they did something with their rates to take in more money, it doesn't come out of the general fund.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So if they have turnover money, even if we didn't authorize money in a pot for contractual employees, that could be used as well, correct?
I don't believe the budget office would sign off that funds are available if they're going into turnover and have spent all their money identified in the contractual temporary line item.
Okay. How many, you said there were 300 approximate workers?
Over 300. And so maybe if you could indulge me to give you a little bit of an education on how this works. So by state COMA regulations, the minimum oversight or supervision for childcare, it's one teacher for 15 students. You may then take that group up, but then you have to have a second staff person in there. And so with classrooms, we talked about the numbers, and I've been down here talking about schools before. You could have a classroom with 30 students. You could put a teaching assistant floating through that building. With childcare, we can't do that.
Okay. Out of the 300-ish folks that you have, is there a rough percentage of how many of them are bumping up against the 1,500 threshold?
More than 50% of them.
More than 50, okay.
Yeah.
And then, Ms. Rhodes, how many other, besides the folks that were, I mean, this bill seems to be directed at helping the Parks and Recs Department, but how many other contractual employees have we had, just say over the past maybe 2 fiscals?
That needed more than 1,500 hours?
Correct.
The 2 that I could remember, there was one in the police department that was working on a DNA backlog that they had to stop working after 1,500 hours. And that was a huge issue for the police department because they'd spent a lot of time training. The other one was the medical advisor for the fire department. That is a temporary contractual position. And they were very concerned about him exceeding 1,500 hours.
And how many total contractual employees are there out there? They could be potentially impacted if we made this change.
Earlier, I said less than 50. I can't imagine. Most of them only work 500 to 600 hours. And we really pay close attention to this, which is why Recs and Parks hates to get their email from me in October that says, here's a list of your employees that have got to stop working. So we're constantly monitoring it. So there's no intention to have everybody work 2,080 hours. We can't afford it, and it's not needed.
Why not just make the change to impact the Parks and Recs Department, and rather than impacting all of the employees? Is there a reason behind that?
I think because, well, we had problems, like I said, in the medical director for the fire department, and then in the police department and in the DNA. So the idea was, we've had this problem other places. Let's put something into place that continues the 1,500 hours, but in the event that we need to exceed that we have the ability to do it. Again, the budget is going to, mandate how often we can do it and when we can do it. So the intention is certainly not to have every temp work 2,080 hours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Tate.
I just had, because they keep asking about the rec and parks as being sort of the trigger for this. When have they sat down and said, look, we have this enterprise program that has a consistent need or a growing need to move away from this practice of only having these temporary contractuals when it's clear that they need this consistent trained staffing year after year, all year round? Why is it that we're working with temps? If we know that we need people that are experienced and we know that there's a constant stream of income to pay these folks, is it the benefit issue? Why is it that they're constantly in a situation where they're finding they don't have enough people to take care of the kids in October or November, and they're scrambling? I mean, I can attest from personal experience that you scramble to get that space in SEC. You're on the computer at 6 a.m. or whenever they open them. So I don't understand why we're constantly paying these people as temporaries when we know it's not a temporary need.
Right.
Andy Rhodes, Personnel Officer. I would assume that it is a budget issue. The departments here, they may have a better answer than I do. I don't know, why they've continued the program the way it is. Could be the flexibility in hiring. I'm not sure.
Hi, Jackie Herman, Recreation and Parks. Right now, the way we're budgeted, I think with having to pay benefits and full-time salaries, we're talking, minimally our directors, it would budgetarily very much impact our program of what we're offering and the fees and the programs that we are able to offer. I mean, it's certainly something to think about down the road, but that's not where we are right now.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chair, I was going to, can we hold this, I would make a motion to hold this resolution for 2 weeks, just because I would like to see if there's a way to maybe address the the child care needs, because, the charter has it there for a reason, and I don't know if I'm necessarily comfortable with just lifting that cap for across the board. While I'm certainly on board with the child care side of the house, I'm not sure I'm on board with every other department. So
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Smith has made a motion. We have to have a, yes. All right, but thank you for the idea. So we'll hold that motion for a moment, right?
Sure.
If there's no further questions, we will have a public hearing. Anyone who wishes to, we'll open the public hearing on resolution number 1818. Anyone wishing to testify, please come down at this time. Mr. Enright, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, ladies of the staff. My name is Patrick Enright. I live at 2052 Huntwood Drive in Gambrels. At the sake of being redundant with displaying all the issues with this particular charter amendment, I'd like to add something to draw us back to the purity of this charter section, section 14 on lines 12 through 14 on page 2. What this does, as it exists now, is that 1,500-hour limit truncates the employment and therefore defines the temporariness of these positions. If you want to change this contractual temporary position, as recommended by the county executive, you eliminate the term temporary and you make it open for all. Now, this is in the pure sense of these words. To address the critical issue of the child care, I would recommend, and you may want to do this if you hold this, recommend that you leave it as it is, and then add on there the ability of the council to create waivers to this upon application of the department head and the chief of staff. That's a possible fix to that. Therefore, all the other employees who aren't affected by this limit of 1,500 hours can go their own merry way as they are now. The critical ones like the police DNA, the child care, which I totally support, can be done by giving the power from the people, if they approve this in the fall, to the council to grant waivers in certain instances to exceed the 1,500 hours. And therefore, you just leave it as it is and add this waiver clause on. That's my recommendation, and I offer it for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Enright. We will now close the public hearing on Resolution 1818. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution number 1818.
Resolution number 1818. Resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to eliminate the 1,500-hour per year limit for contractual temporary employees.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Smith.
Make a recommendation that we hold this, and I know the staff, if they heard what Mr. Enright just stated, it was actually, I think we should hire him as well, if we can prep that amendment to this resolution for next, but make a motion to hold to the next meeting.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll on the motion to hold.
Mr. Fink.
Aye.
Mr. Pruski.
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer.
Aye.
Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Grasso. Mr. Peruka.
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on resolution number 1818 until July 16th meeting is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution number 1918.
Resolution number 1918, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to require that the County Council to confirm by resolution the County Executive's appointment of County Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if Mr. Pruski has comments. Do you have comments?
I do.
That's fine.
Mr.
Mr. Pruski, I'll yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I stated earlier, when somebody asked me about this resolution, I told them in my old social studies teaching days, there's something called checks and balances. And how interesting when the state and federal government have checks and balances that we in the local government do not. If you look at history in the state of Maryland, the executive branch, whether it be the county executive or county commissioners, always have had certainly a lot of authority. But in particular, the county attorney themselves represents both the council and the executive, but is appointed by the executive, except there's no approval. And I believe, again, as any resolution comes forward, this would have to be approved by the voters. So if they disagree, that they feel to say what it is, they would say no. If they agree with our opinion, they would say yes. So for those that make the argument that this is legislative overreach, we're giving it to the people. Just like I'm elected up here as one of 7, people can decide whether or not checks and balances are important, particularly when we're having discussions about Supreme Court justices or cabinet positions that are done by our governor. So I just believe that this is an opportune time to put this in front of the voters and let them decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruski. Mr. Walker, did you have, Mr. Marzick?
Mr. Chairman, members of Council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office, were opposed to this resolution.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Trumbauer.
Just a question, I guess a logistical question. If this were to pass, if the incumbent county attorney is essentially being reappointed, does this come into play, or is it only when there is a change? Does anybody know the answer to that? I don't know.
In my view, if you're asking me, I think that if it's a continuing appointment. So, I mean, if Ms. Duden is the county attorney, if Mr. Hsu wins re-election, and then she's still there, she's not really being reappointed.
So this doesn't trigger?
I would not consider it to be triggered unless there's a new county attorney appointed sometime in the future.
Ms. Blair, would you comment on that?
Yeah, Lori Blair, Classmar, Deputy County Attorney. I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, is there, we need to have a hearing, right? We'll open the public hearing then on Resolution 1918. Anyone wishing to testify on 1918, please come down at this time. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will start with the gentleman. Please name and address in 22 minutes, please.
Andrew Chase, 1 St. Andrews Garth, Severna Park, Maryland. I'm a resident of Anne Arundel County. I grew up here, and so I ended up going to McGill University in Canada. And while I'm there, I learned about how they have their political system. And it's actually kind of similar to the county charter, whereby the Prime Minister is able to appoint any person he wants without really consulting anyone. He just has to tell the Governor General, who is the person he appoints, who he wants to appoint, and that the Governor General has to okay it. So I think what makes America special throughout the world is our strong checks and balances, what Mr. Pruski alluded to, of which our government is limited because it constrains itself. It constrains itself so it doesn't approach on the people. And I think that having an extra process that this amendment provides is good for the people because it gives transparency and it makes us a better county. I also think that this is another way that we can pledge our allegiance to the flag. We all said the Pledge of Allegiance, and we pledged our allegiance to the Republic. And one of the defining principles of the American Republic is its checks and balances. So I think that to fulfill our county's preamble, to create a better county, we should vote for this amendment to allow it to go to the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that. Very much appreciate the fact that you called us a republic. Thank you, which we are. Thank you. Ma'am?
My name is Christine Lockwood, and I'm going to, what I'm going to say applies to the next two resolutions. I think you probably only need to hear me say it once. Although I wrote it for the second, it applies to both, so I'll just go ahead and read this. I am speaking in support of the resolutions 2018 and this resolution 1918. The police chief position and the county attorney position are high-ranking decision-making positions that affect the well-being of everyone in the county. We know from an FBI counterintelligence report that white supremacists have organized to target law enforcement agencies for employment as a place where they can advance their agenda. It's fact. It's in the FBI report. Yet Maryland and Anne Arundel County have taken few steps to implement checks and balances to guard against that and to protect the integrity of law enforcement agencies. This is a danger to the community, and it's a danger to other officers on the force. The county attorney position is similar in that it's a decision-making position. It's a position people with agendas that aren't necessarily in the best interest of the public target to advance a more specific agenda. I am the daughter of a retired police officer. And our police officers who join the force to serve and protect need the protection of this resolution. I have also seen a tendency in high-level decision-making positions for those positions to be filled in a way that violates federal equal opportunity employment laws with no application opportunity for women and minorities. Oftentimes, someone is just appointed. I think that's me. So I'll wrap it up, but I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your testimony.
Good
Yes, ma'am.
afternoon. Good evening. My name is Reverend Marguerite Morris, and I'm speaking on tonight from a personal perspective. And I'm in agreement that for the need for this. So thank you to those of you that have put this forth and those that support it, because it is about accountability, and in light of the events around this nation, it's one more step to us as a county being more accountable, more transparent, and this is a decision-making position. So it is important that we put this to the people of Anne Arundel County who it's going to impact. It's not going to harm anyone, but it does get their feeling on how we do things. And the more transparency you have, the more people you have in the pot making those decisions, the more that we can feel that those decisions are fair and equitable to the citizens of Anne Arundel County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Enright.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, ladies of the staff. I'm Patrick Enright, 2052 Huntwood Drive in Gambrels. I happen to endorse wholeheartedly this charter amendment and what these good people have said. I'd like to add one thing, a note of interest, that if it was good enough for the delegates of the Constitutional Convention to give the Senate the power to advise and consent of presidential appointments, one of which was me. Most people don't understand that when I was appointed by commission as the second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, it was done so literally, formally, with advice and consent of the Senate of the United States. Little old lowly me, second lieutenant. That's how the system works. The checks and balances goes all the way from the bottom all the way to the highest. I don't think that Anne Arundel County should be treated any differently. I think that those appointments should go through the same process to give the legislature, the county council, a say in vetting these appointments, and it's a vetting process. So I totally agree and wholeheartedly endorse both 19 and 20 resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enright. We will now close the public hearing on Resolution 1918. Madam Secretary, please read the title of Resolution 1918.
Resolution number 1918, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to require the County Council to confirm by resolution the County Executive's appointment of County Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Any discussion? Let me add a thought if there's no other discussion. I think this is a very interesting resolution, and I think what the idea of checks and balances that it proposes to reach is a good idea. What I don't think it does, in my view, my humble view, is that I don't think it addresses the real problem of the joint representation of the administration and the council by the Office of Law. I think this is done in a lot of places in a lot of different venues where we say we build a Chinese wall and we'll represent you and we'll represent you. But I believe the idea that you can represent both is really a legal fiction and really a fiction. And I don't think it's really practically possible. But that doesn't mean that I am criticizing anybody who's trying to do it well. I just don't think it's actually something that can be done. So that's my thought. So I don't think that this addresses that real problem. That's my comment. With that, Madam Secretary, please, is there no further discussion? Let's call the roll on resolution number 1918.
Mr. Fink?
Nay.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Nay.
Mr. Peruka?
Nay.
4 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative. Resolution number 1918 is defeated.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please read the title of resolution number 2018.
Resolution number 2018, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to require the County Council to confirm by resolution the County Executive's appointment of Chief of Police.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if Mr. Pruski has additional comments. I have a feeling that the vote will probably go similarly to the last vote that we just took, seeing as how we had discussion on this topic. We've heard from members of the audience, which I agree with wholeheartedly, that this extra layer of transparency is necessary, especially in these two positions. With my experience in particular, during the first term on this council, we saw a police chief who I would say compromised himself and as a result resigned from his job. And I think there needs to be some accountability and some transparency in this process. And I'm sorry to have seen 1918 fail, but I'm hopeful that 2018 will pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Pruski?
No, I just want to add certainly that, it's unfortunate, obviously, the prior resolution to pass, and I ask that folks consider this, but if they won't get a crack at it, the voters don't get a crack at it in terms of a charter amendment, they're sure going to get a crack at it during the general election. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Mr. Marzik?
Mr. Chairman, members of Council, Bernie Marzick in the County Executive's Office, we oppose this resolution as well.
Thank you. So we will have a public hearing on Resolution 2018. We have some folks signed up. C.J. Mushaw, Margarita Morris, Christy Lockwood, Erika Casco. That's right. Thank you. We'll begin with C.J. Mushaw, please, and would you state your name and address for the record?
Hi there. Oh, thank you so much. My name is C.J. Mushaw. I'm from 3884 Ponder Drive in Mayo, Maryland. I happened to read this resolution in the Gazette on Sunday by accident, and I was extremely proud of the body here for bringing it forth. I'm really disappointed in the last ruling, but anyways, I'm going to keep my hopes up. Over the past 6 years, I think we've had a turnover of an average of 2 years per chief of police, and hopefully we're not going to have a fourth coming up, but some things are out of your control. I want to reiterate some of the wonderful things that have already been said. I'm a firm believer in government transparency, and I trust that a council of 7 folks would bring so much more accountability to the process. I actually see it as an assistance to the county executive's office. There's a lot on that branch's plate, and sometimes some choices are made that may be regrettable. I think you guys can actually add a lot to that. So along with the checks and balances, I know that this body collectively knows way more about the Constitution than I will ever pretend to know. But I will say that a government is our servant, not our master. And also the necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power is really at stake here. And it's an opportunity for you all to participate in that. As I reflect on the country's 242nd anniversary of independence this Wednesday, I remember the intricate and deliberate checks and balances that the founding folks wrote into the founding documents that would guide us into our future for centuries to come. And I really hope that you all will think about that when you do roll call in just a second. I also want to point out how difficult it's been to bring folks onto the force in the county. In May, we did some really big steps forward to help that, and I think this will help bring folks onto the body as well.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it. Ma'am?
Yes, my name is Reverend Marguerite Morris. I live at 701 Harvest Run Drive in Odenton, Maryland. I'm appearing before you today as a private citizen. Again, I want to thank those that have presented this today and the others supporting. First, we appreciate the services and bravery of many of the officers of the Anne Arundel County Police Force. Many lay their lives on the line on a daily basis. This resolution is not anti-police, but there is a cry across this nation for greater accountability and transparency in government agencies, in particular with police forces. To do so will not hurt anyone. Oftentimes, persons hear the word greater accountability and they think, again, it's anti-police, but it's not. Greater accountability is a way to protect both our officers and the citizens of Anne Arundel County. As one of many individuals that have had issues, I've had those issues over the past 6 years around the death of my daughter, Catherine Sarah Morris, in Anne Arundel County, and the accountability of our local police department. In light of the issues, those issues and others challenging us around this state and our country, it would be in the best interest of the citizens of Anne Arundel County to adopt this resolution. It is another step towards our local government and its leaders presenting the citizens of the county with a greater measure of transparency, better accountability of our law enforcement, and an improved means of checks and balances for the office of the county executive. Council, anything that brings independent consideration into the equation strengthens the transparency, strengthens equal access, strengthens consideration, and furthers our ability in our county and its citizens. Giving the citizen opportunity to let their voices be known and their thoughts. Let them confirm or disaffirm what they desire in our local government. In closing, I will say, my daughter died in 2012, gentlemen and ladies. Since then, there have been 6 different individuals to occupy the office of Chief of Police for Anne Arundel County. Perhaps they need others in the equation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your testimony. Christy Lockwood?
Good evening again. I'm here to support this resolution. The chief of police position is a high-ranking, decision-making position. It affects the well-being of everyone in this county, of police officers, of mothers, of fathers, of citizens, residents, everyone. And we know that the integrity of law enforcement agencies is under attack, not by people who are calling them out, but by people who want to join the agency to advance an agenda that none of us, hopefully none of us, want. And we need to do whatever we need to do to put checks and balances in place to help prevent that from happening. It helps everyone. It helps our police officers. It helps our residents. It helps everyone. We have too few checks and balances considering we have been warned, and we were warned a long time ago. And as I have mentioned, I'm the daughter of a police officer. We want our police officers who join the force to serve and protect to have the very best police chief they can have. We need to do everything we can do. You can say, okay, I'll approve the appointee. That can be your general position, unless there's some wild reason otherwise. But hold that power. Have that checks and balances available. Finally, as a victim's advocate, I can testify that in Anne Arundel County, I have witnessed racial disparities in the quality and availability of police services, and that is how I became connected with Ms. Morris here. I can say we still need to clean up from the days of Leopold. We are still suffering from that.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Casco.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to just correct you. My name is Erica Scott, and I live at 465 Mainview Court.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
It's okay. But thank you. 465 Mainview Court, Glen Burnie, Maryland. First off, I'd like to thank you all for allowing us to be here to express our feelings and our hopes for this council and this county. Just as Mr. Peruski believed for a resolution for 1918, I believe that there should be checks and balances in Resolution 2018. I asked for the County Council to confirm Resolution 2018 in order to thoroughly vet the police chiefs for Anne Arundel County, leaving little to no room for personal interest-driven decisions in the hiring of one of the most important forms of leadership in our community. I sit before you as a citizen who knows all too well about some of the misconduct of the Anne Arundel County Police Department, and I only can pray that you will see there is a need for oversight in the selection of the police chief here in Anne Arundel County. It should not be left up to an individual, yet the decision should be made with as much transparency for the sake of the children who have been mislabeled, the reports that have been filed inaccurately, the incomplete investigations, and for the citizens that want to rebuild the trust in the service members of the Anne Arundel County Police Department. Again, I do believe, such as Mr. Peruski and Mr. Walker, that I hope in this particular resolution that you all will come together and we will pass it for the sake of the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate all of your testimony. May I ask a question, ma'am, of Ms. Lockwood?
Yes.
Briefly, just briefly. It's late, and I'm sorry to go into the weeds here, but are you making the case that there are those that join the police force and rise up through the ranks for an agenda that is counter to the mission of the force? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it. We will now.
Mr. Enright.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, I'm.
Two who came up.
Ms. Johnson.
Excuse me, Ms. Johnson. We'll save Mr. Enright for the end. We'll go to you, Ms. Johnson.
Julie Johnson, P.O. Box 6634, Annapolis, Maryland.
That's correct.
I support this resolution as well. I support the testimony provided by other witnesses here. And I will I'm sort of off what I was going to say because some of it's been said, but I will simply tell you a different story. I attended the last day of oral arguments in Mr. Leopold's trial, and it came out that the the chief of police and the attorney for Anne Arundel County both serve at the pleasure of the county executive as a matter of law. Therefore, if this is a single person making this appointment, it puts way too much, in my opinion, it puts way too much power in the hands of one person, whereas if there has been scrutiny by the members of the council, I think that that's one important protection. And again, I will support Ms. Lockwood's testimony about there are persons who have agendas that are contrary to the public or to many members of the public. And it's just not talked about. And you've heard me talk about Judge Aaron. In Alabama, Colonel Al Lingo was the head of the state police, the governor, pardoned people who had inflicted incredible pain and a lifetime of poverty and suffering and deprivation of medical treatment and medication. So that it's not merely limited to the chief of police. It spreads through all of the organizations. So therefore, like these other people have testified, the more transparency we can obtain, the better for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Enright.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, ladies of the staff. My name is Patrick Enright, 2052 Huntwood Drive in Gambrels. I would like to say that I endorse even more wholeheartedly Resolution 20 and endorse all of the testimony beforehand. I would like to draw a direct analog between my experience and Councilman Smith's experience of being commissioned with advice and consent of the Senate of the United States, appointed by the President as a lowly lieutenant of Marines, authorized to deploy his troops to use deadly force on the battlefield to defend our country. There's a direct analog between that method of vetting and appointing to the chief of police, who is a senior officer, also who can employ his troops, his young officers in defense, using deadly force in defense of our community. Now, that may be a few levels down from the federal government. I think the analog for vetting and controlling these appointments is exactly the same, should be the same, particularly when the use of deadly force is authorized to defend our country and our community. So I would encourage you to endorse this resolution and give the 5 votes to send it to the voters and let them decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enright. Thank you all. We will now, the public hearing on resolution number 2018 is now closed. Madam Secretary, please read the title of resolution 2018.
Resolution 2018, resolution proposing an amendment to the Charter of Anne Arundel County to require that the County Council to confirm by resolution the County Executive's appointment of Chief of Police.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? I would like to add a comment then myself, and that is that not unlike the previous resolution, I feel like this is a step in the right direction, but it's not the answer. And I know, again, it's very late. I'll be brief. My belief is that the chief law enforcement officer really ought to be elected. He ought to be an elected official, not, and we in Anne Arundel County have adopted a situation where our sheriff, our elected official, is not really our chief law enforcement officer, because it's done by the police chief, and the police chief is answerable to his boss, to the person who appoints him. So again, my belief is that this is a step in the right direction, but it really doesn't solve the problem that I think exists, which is we should go back to electing the chief law enforcement officer, and this doesn't do that. However, having said that, I have to just honestly tell you that I have been, my situation has been moved by the testimony that I've heard this evening, And I would like to make a motion to hold this bill.
Second.
Is there any discussion on that? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll on holding this bill?
Mr. Fink?
This resolution, excuse me.
Until the next meeting, correct?
Until the next meeting, yes, ma'am.
Mr. Fink?
Aye.
Mr. Pruski?
Aye.
Mr. Trumbauer?
Aye.
Mr. Walker?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Grasso?
Aye.
And Mr. Peruka?
Aye.
7 in the affirmative, none in the negative. The motion to hold the vote on resolution number 2018 is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Is there any other business to be brought before the County Council? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Thank my colleagues and thank the staff.